a joint responsibility because our taxpayers are the same as the state's taxpayers. If the which it already has been collecting, it will probably maintain its AA plus rating. But from the recent conversations with the rating agency, might incur some drop.
I understand, but every time the city decides to embark on a large project, whether they do it responsibly or irresponsibly, and it causes a shortfall, then is it the state's responsibility to then have to bail them out every time that happens?
No, I don't think you have to bail them up.
Isn't that what we're doing though now? Isn't that what we're doing?
I think we're trying to work together for the benefit of the taxpayers in total.
And the state has given the 10 years.
Yes.
We've extended it based on your numbers, based on what you folks came to us for. So we've been, a very good partner so far, but
yes.
I don't believe the city has been responsible. And then I'd want to ask the chair of the council a question, if I may continue, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So, Ron, you did state that the state must provide adequate funding. I'm not sure where it says that we have to provide adequate funding, but my question is, should every county decide to take on a huge project, then the state must provide adequate funding? What happened to home rule? Isn't that something that the counties have always held up as a flag? Home rule, home rule, home rule? And that if it's your county project, as all the other counties are now saying, this is a Honolulu project. So if it's a Maui project, if it's a Kauai project, if it's a Big Island project, then do we have to provide adequate funding?
I think your question indicates that the state legislature has a really difficult policy decision that you need to make. Looking at this rail project and looking at the significant benefits that it would provide to the residents of Oahu, which comprises the vast majority of residents in our state, from the council or city's perspective, we believe that we should have a partnership between the state and the city, and that for the state legislature to extend the surcharge by an additional amount that would generate sufficient revenue to complete rail construction, that would be an appropriate decision for the state legislature to make. This is not an easy situation, not only for us to be, not only for the state legislators, but also for city council members.
Right, but as you know, we have provided adequate funding. We thought based on the city's numbers, that we were providing adequate funding. And having been on the city council myself, having been there during rail when it failed, I did say at the time that if we didn't pass it then, we're not going to be able to afford it, and that's where we're at. We're not able to afford it at this point. The city's not able to afford it without help. And who's to say that this is the end? Who's to say it's not going to run over the $2.5 billion?
All I can say is that the city council, as elected officials on the city level, share the frustration of the state legislators. When Hart and other city officials presented the project and asked for the extension to 2027 during the 2015 legislative session, you were presented with numbers by Hart in terms of what the construction cost was going to be. That is the figure that the city council relied upon, and we all believed that the amount that the legislature approved and the extension that you authorized would be sufficient to cover the capital cost completely for completion of rail to Ala Moana. Unfortunately, that has not been the case, and the projections were way off. And as to why that happened, I mean, that is a matter of concern, and a lot of questions have been raised. But we have to face the reality as it is now, which is we only have enough funds to complete rail at the farthest point to Middle Street.
Okay, but what's the guarantee it's going to be 2.5 billion? What's the guarantee?
Well, Hart is going to be presenting their own presentation shortly, and will be explaining their cost projections. But
thank you, Madam Chair.
I would note that the $8.2 billion figure that they've come up with, exclusive of finance and debt service costs, have been consistent, and I think that they've done a better job of projecting, given the fact that they've had real-world experience in awarding contracts. They've seen the actual construction costs. So they've stuck to their projections, and I would think that whatever you authorize hopefully we'll fund it, complete it to Ala Moana. And if there are any additional overruns down the road, I can make a commitment to you as council chair that the council will not be coming back to the state legislature asking for any additional funds over and above what we're asking the legislature approve during this current during this special session.
Thank you.
You have me recorded.
Chair Kahili. Sorry, Senator Kahili.
I have two questions, one for Mayor Caldwell and then the other one for Mr. Fujito. Morning, Mayor.
Good morning. Anybody have this?
One of the top three that you had talked about in your presentation was adequate funding and the FTA stress test that will potentially come after the September 15th deadline when, if we're able to come to a consensus during a special session, you're able to present that to the FTA. Can you describe the stress test and how would they stress GE extension option versus a TAT option? What are the results of a failed stress test?
So I'm going to try to answer your question, but I think also Sam Carnaggio could talk about that. He used to work for the FTA. But systems throughout the country, when they're getting money from the federal government through the FTA, have to come up with a financial plan along with their partners at the federal government as how they're going to fund the project. And as partners, they're going to take whatever local funding source there is, they're going to make sure that it's adequate, not just based on the stated promises presented at the time it's passed, but to see if they believe it under their assumptions is sufficient. And so they take our number, our GET number, and they stress it. You know, if we have an ambitious growth rate source there is, they're going to make sure that it's adequate,
it's
not just
like
based on the stated promises
and therefore
presented
the
at the time that you think we're getting, they're going to say is less than that. And if it's less than what we projected, they're going to say the financial plan is inadequate and there isn't enough money. On TAT, they would do the same. Now, they've not seen TAT proposed before. I'm assuming that they're going to be looking at how often does it go up and how often does it go down. We know that it's gone down several more times than we've gone through national recessions. So it's going to be a more volatile, more thin type of funding source. They're going to look at the fact that TAT goes up and down for counties on a regular basis. And they're going to look at the assumed growth rates, not just today, but going forward. And so while I'm not opposed to looking at alternative funding sources, my concern is that new funding sources are going to be looked at very carefully by the FTA. And long after you guys go home and we submit our financial plan, they could come back and say that assumed funding that you thought you have, you don't have, and you fall short again. And then we are looking at funding sources at the county level, which includes operating money. And that's why, you know, when this system was created, when the council voted to extend the surcharge, impose a county surcharge on the GET, it is a county surcharge, voted for by the people at the Honolulu City Council and signed into law by the mayor, paid for by the people of Oahu, the city and county. When they voted for it, the idea was just two funding sources and none others. One was GET, and then the money coming from the federal government. Nowhere was it ever discussed that local tax dollars would be used. And if that discussion occurred, then there would have been a discussion about the effect on bonding. But the idea was outside funding sources. And why is that? Every legacy system in the country is built with a dedicated outside funding source. If you use operating money, just like all of you know, in hard times that money disappears. And the federal government wants to know no matter what, there's enough money to complete the project, and it's usually through some form of sales tax around the country.
Thanks,
Thank
Mayor.
you.
The only thing I'd like to add to that is this morning I flew in from Hilo, and I had a couple who flew on the flight with me, and I asked them why they were coming. They said they were coming to Oahu for the day to go shopping at Ala Moana.
Right.
So I would say that couple from Hilo also contributed to the 4.5% general excise surcharge today. And directly is contributing to the rail project. Thank you, Mayor.
And I hope someday that couple will be able to get off the airport in Honolulu and get on the train to Ala Moana. Thank
Mr.
you.
Fujito? Wayne? The mayor just mentioned the TAT being a volatile option. When looking at the three major funding sources, RPT, GE, or TAT, would you agree with that?
Yes.
The rail project currently is used in or is financed by general excise tax, tax-exempt commercial paper, and general obligation bonds. If the TET increase statewide or on the island of Oahu is used as a front-loading mechanism to generate money up front, what type of, how would that affect the GO bonds that the city will need to utilize to meet the debt service on future costs? TAT money up front versus general excise extension. How would that affect the bond rating?
There are a lot of effects depending on how the TAT is structured. From some of these proposals that I have heard, that the amount of funds that would be flowing into the counties would be decreased for various reasons, and that might hurt. That hurts the operations of these county governments. Whenever this flow is reduced, and I believe that was a part of Mayor Arakawa's point, is that whenever that you start discussing about these other taxes, a lot of questions start to come up and a lot of opportunities too. So the direct effect would be reduced funding for the operations which the TAT already provides.
And if we have a reduced funding for the project, what will the county have to do?
We'd have to provide that funding, probably would have to raise taxes.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Senator Espiro.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor or someone from the administration, just some clarification. You noted on the slides and the testimony hundreds of millions of dollars on investing into the infrastructure. How is that being paid back today? Is it hard money? Is it property taxes?
Thank you, Senator. The reason
Combination?
why we wanted to present what we're doing is there's some discussion of, how much commitment does Honolulu have in this project and how much is Honolulu spending around this project. And that's why we did this presentation, this informational briefing. I thought it was important because we've not done that in a coordinated way before. Most of these things are being paid through the issuance of bonds, because most infrastructure projects on this island, or all of them really, just like the state and just like the country, are paid through by the issuance of bonds and paid back over 25 years. So the things that you heard described today are being paid for that way. The bulk of it is coming from the taxpayers of this island. In the case of sewer, as you know, there is a sewer fee that people pay along with their water bill, and that fund is separated from general fund money, and it's used to pay for the bonds that are issued on behalf of our sewer system.
I understand all that. So
Yeah.
at this stage, you're saying that no hard funds are paying for this infrastructure? None. Zero?
No.
Although there may be a connection, obviously, for example, with the Mayor Wright Evil A project, the TOD there,
Right.
and we're going to have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure.
Right.
But you're saying none, even a percentage or pro rata, is being paid for with rail funds.
No, rail funds need to be used to build rail, and as you know, we have a huge challenge there. So no.
Does she have a?
You want to? Yes.
Because I would think hard funds could pay for some of that. I would.
The only time HART funds is being used is if they have to relocate an existing infrastructure line, whether it's sewer or water. So if our line is there first and they need to put, let's say, a column there right over our line, HART funds is being used to relocate it, to move it over.
So it's not being used for an expansion
No.
per se in terms of capacity. If a population, Mayor Wright again, going from 350 units to 2,500 units.
That's correct. So the Mayor Wright's housing, or all of our sewer projects is funded, as Mayor said, from our ratepayers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question for Council Chair Minor, please. And for discussional purposes, my question, Ron, the original bill back in the early 2000 when we passed and they had given the authority to the council to raise the tax. The first bill introduced by Representative, at that time, former Speaker, and myself, the amount was 1%. And it went with a support of a majority of the labor groups as well as Mayor Hanneman. Now, I believe it's water under the bridge, but had we stuck with the 1%, we probably would not have been in this problem today. Just for discussional purposes, how would you react if we, instead of looking at the TAT and just up the 0.5% and do a 1% allowable for the city and county to do the rail?
Well, I think it's an option.
And the opposition, of course, at that time was the elected officials from Oahu that would not agree to the 1%. And so we stuck with the 0.5%.
And of course, I was a member of that legislative body that ultimately voted in favor of the surcharge. I think what you've raised is worthy of further discussion. However, and I think I echo the sentiments of every elected official on this island and perhaps even throughout the state, which is that whenever we consider or talk about a possible tax increase, that we should do so with restraint and prudence. I think that before the legislature adopts a tax increase with respect to the excise tax, that you need to receive the full input from the public to get their reaction, because I believe that many of our residents feel that they are already heavily taxed, and concerns have already been expressed about the regressivity of the excise tax. And so if you increase it, that concern becomes even more of a concern. So I would tread carefully in that regard, but again, the position of the council and I think of the city is basically that the more straightforward way of handling this, and an approach that our constituents, generally speaking, can accept, is to take the 0.5% and extend it for a sufficient period of time to allow us to meet our contractual obligations to the Federal Transit Administration.
Okay. Thank you. No questions more from the Senate?
House members. Let's start with Representative Buenaventura.
Thank you. Now, Mayor Caldwell, you were cautioned by Chairs Luke and Chairs Inouye to stick to rail funding, yet it went on with the sewer and the TOD and other infrastructure. So the impression I got was that all of that is going to be funded by HART. However, when you answered Senator Espero's question, you said none of it is for HART funding. So which is it? Is it going to, are all of those hundreds of millions of dollars, after we told you to limit it to rail funding, are those going to be funded by HART or not?
They're being funded by the residents and taxpayers of the city and county of Honolulu, except when there's a relocation of a sewer or water main directly in line of where the rail line is being built. Some of that money is HART money paying for relocation, but the bulk of what we presented is being paid for by you and by me and everyone else in this room to build a better urban core.
Okay, so are you going to be asking us later on for, other than construction money, for all of that other infrastructure money? Because, I mean, that's what this is for, right? Is rail funding.
No, and we've been doing it since I've been mayor, and we have not asked you for money. We're doing this as part of our responsibility as a city and county of Honolulu.
So all of the infrastructure, the hundreds of millions of dollars that all your agencies came out to testify to, not all of that has been spent, right? Because we haven't finished rail, correct?
Some has been spent, and much is going to be spent, as you heard in the presentation, over the coming decade or two.
Okay, so in fact, if we don't fund rail, because frankly, as a neighbor island rep, after the leak in Civil Beat, I'm being pressured right now to vote no on any rail tax increase, whether it's GET or TAT, because every neighbor island constituent is being told that we are going to be paying for Honolulu tax, for the Honolulu Rail. So what I want to know is, if we in fact we don't finish the construction, isn't it true that then you will be saving infrastructure money that you had just presented to us?
We will continue to rebuild infrastructure that is aging. As you know, it's a challenge that our country faces, our state faces, and our city faces. No, we're going to, for example, rebuild the sewer infrastructure around Mayor Wright housing so that we can go from 1,500 homes to maybe 5,000 to house more people who otherwise are out on the street. We will continue to build our water mains back up because of water main breaks on a regular and ongoing basis. We're going to continue to do this infrastructure improvement, but we're motivated make sure we get it done, particularly around rail stations, so we can build more affordable housing and create a more livable urban core. And that, I'm hoping, is going to be tied to rail. But much of it will continue even if rail were not to succeed, which is hard for me to imagine. Okay, thank you.
Rep. Lopresti.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, please. Thank you again for coming. I've got several points and several questions, so I'll try to work through it first, and then we'll go back to the questions, if that's right. Speaking for myself, as a representative of Ewa Beach, obviously clearly benefits from fully developed route. I support, in general, the idea of finishing it. The conversation today and for the coming week, and next week, I believe, is really just about how to pay for it. Now, what I was hoping to see in the testimony provided by the city was more to the point of what some of my colleagues have gotten to, which is talking about opinions of TAT versus GAT, a combination, those sorts of things. I would like to hear very clearly what your opinion is of TAT versus GAT or a combination thereof. Some discussion has been mentioned about potential volatility of TAT, but my understanding is rather that TAT consistently has been going up and up and up, and is no more volatile, if perhaps less volatile, than GET. I'd also like to hear your opinion about, because I would like to see, if we do any funding continuation at all, that it includes a full audit. You know, the people, I think, are demanding confidence and accountability, confidence in accountability for the project. And I'd like to see anything we move include an audit. One thing that troubles me is some of the verbal sleight of hand that keeps being used when we talk about, you guys come here and you ask us to raise the taxes for you. And then if there's discussion about moving to this version or that version that might then require some tax raising on the city and county's part, then all of a sudden we're making you raise taxes. And the sophistry in that is, it seems to suggest that somehow you're not already asking us to do that. And I just want to be clear with the people of the state that either plan will raise taxes on them, right? It means that they will be paying. It's whether they pay through you or through us or both of us, right? Now, I don't accept that, perhaps the premise that others accept about property taxes, because one theory about the cost of living in this state, and I speak as a homeowner, one of the reasons that the housing is so damn expensive is that because we have some of the lowest property taxes in the nation. And that makes us a tax haven for wealthy investors nationally, internationally. And there will never be a shortage of demand for property in paradise. But by creating an extra incentive for people to buy luxury condos here, for example, with really low property taxes, that actually takes away market share of property for people with working families like me and the people I represent. So it upsets me a little bit when I keep hearing that this fallback to somehow property taxes are sacrosanct, but if we tax the poor, that's okay. I have a problem with that. I have a really serious problem with that. So I'd like to hear some more honesty about how we tax people and who it really affects. Last but not least, I understand there was that release that was mentioned before, but you know, for the last 12 years, Oahu taxpayers have been paying a 10% skim to the state that has been subsidizing works and projects on neighbor islands. And from what I understand and what I've seen with the TAT, that's not going to be money out of neighbor islanders' pockets. That's an extra tax on people visiting those places. So I just wanted to set that straight as well. So first, opinions about TAT, GET combo, the audit, and some straight shooting, at least, on saying to the taxpayers that, you know, either way they're going to be paying more, and it's not just on us.
Okay, so number one, you talked GT versus TAT. I think in every time I've come before your committee, Rep. Lopresti, I think I made it pretty clear that I support GET. I haven't wavered from it. I think it is a source of funding that is assured. It's been tested for 10 years. The FTA has accepted it, and it generates the revenue sufficient to complete the project. And I've asked for 10 additional years to get us to Ala Moana, with provisos that once the project is completed in 2025 or 2026, we know what the absolute costs are, that perhaps there would be a reduction in the tax or an elimination of the tax or somehow the state using the tax. So I support GET, and I haven't wavered from that. On an audit, I support each and every mechanism possible to find out how do we do better, how does HART do better in controlling cost and avoiding slippage of schedule. There's been 5 or 6 audits done since I've been mayor. I support all of them. I think the city audit has revealed a lot of things that HART is addressing. I also think the APTA peer review that was supported by my former DTS director and then the interim executive director of HART worked hard to get that audit completed. It's very helpful. And if there's further audits need to be done, I support those too. I'll be supporting the council resolution recommending an audit, and I assume that HART may support it too. So I'm for audits. Anything additional that we need to do a better job of controlling costs in this project is something that I want to see happen. On the third point, raising taxes. I'm supporting extension of the GET, not raising the GET. And it's not the GET. You are not raising taxes, Rep. Lopresti. You're giving the authority to the city and county of Honolulu to create a county surcharge. The council has twice voted, one, to create the surcharge, and secondly, to extend it. And the second time I signed it into law. That is skin in the game. That is the county government creating a surcharge. What we're asking for basically is the authority from you to do something you can do. But make no mistake, I'm not asking you to vote to raise taxes and give it to Honolulu. We are asking for the authority that you have to do what we need to build.
Here's why I have a slightly different opinion than you on that, right? But I have to talk to my voters, and they certainly don't see it that way when I vote to give you the authority to raise taxes. You're my elder, but, you know, I look at it, to use an analogy of, you know, if my kid's going to buy a car and he's going to buy it with cash from the allowance that I give him the authority to use this money, and he gets in financial trouble, and he says, well, Dad, I gotta get more money to pay for this car. I said, well, use your credit card. Just talking about bond ratings. And then the response is, well, I can't use my credit card because if I put all that money in my credit card, it's going to affect my credit. You know, that's just put it as simple as possible. That's how I see this. And I guess there's a fundamental disagreement about that. You didn't speak to the TAT volatility.
I want to get to that. I see it a little different, by the way, on the credit, because that's the full faith and credit of the city and county of Honolulu backing these bonds. And as you know, we have a AA+ bond rating, one of the best in the country. We worked hard to get it. We're working hard to keep it. So our credit card is doing pretty well, even with the challenges of rail. And we're going to work hard to keep it that way. That's why we don't want to use the operating money, because that will affect our credit and all of us will be negatively impacted. Your point about low real property taxes, I don't know if, I see it differently. The average price of a home on this island 2 months ago was $795,000. It's now dropped down to $750,000. Our taxes may be relatively low on real property tax, but our values are extremely high, and any increase, even 1 penny, has a dramatic impact on your constituents. So I'm absolutely opposed to raising real property taxes on single-family residential homes.
Well, thank you.
But to get your point, to your point about taxing the wealthy, as you know, we've now twice under our administration created a Res A category of real property tax. So you pay $3.50 for $1,000 in value. People who are buying second homes, $1 million and above, are now paying $9. We just did this past session of the council with the budget. I want to thank Chair Menor and Chair Monahan for pushing this forward. So we're doing what you're saying, and we are collecting additional revenue from those who own $1 million homes who do not have a homeowner's exemption. As to your 10% withholding, I'm appreciative of some of the options you talked about, of reducing that to the true cost of collection. I think it's fair to do that, and I'm looking forward to that occurring.
And there's the last thing I wanted to share with everybody. I mean, some of the best, most interesting letters I got from last session when we were considering instances that might actually lead to the counties having to look at property tax increases. Some of the most encouraging letters I got were from people who didn't live here, who said, if you actually do something that increases property taxes, I'm going to have to sell my rental units. And I thought that was wonderful, because that means locals could actually buy them. So I'm done. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Before we proceed, I just would like to ask our House members as well as our colleagues to keep our questions short so we can accommodate as many questions as possible and get more input from the audience as well. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, House members, any other questions? Rep. Tupola.
Thank you, Chair. For the mayor, please. Thank you. I have 3 questions, and I will keep it short. One is about price, one is about turnover, and one is about funding. So when you assumed office, Mayor, what was the price tag of the rail?
$5.2 billion.
And what is the price tag today?
$8.2 billion.
And in regards to the, I guess you said there was 5 audits, maybe, since in the 5 audits, were all of the suggestions and remedies, were all of them applied to the state as to everything you guys could do to manage it better?
I mean, what have we done with the audit recommendations?
Yeah, so in each
Yes.
audit, recommendations came out, and I think that's what the question
Right.
was today, is we
Right.
wanted to see what's changed as opposed to all the peripheral things happening with wastewater, so what?
Right. So when you hear from Hart, they're going to run through the things
What's-
that they've adopted, that they're implementing. Of course, the audits came up with various recommendations. They're in the process of adopting those recommendations. The one that I liked the best was creating a better control of change orders by creating a separate group to review all change orders, and I know they're implementing that. That one, to me, jumped out the most in terms of making a difference in terms of
Because the change
increasing
orders
costs.
is one of the biggest reasons why the cost has skyrocketed. And so was there contingency funds or contingency money buffering for incidents like that built into the budget of the
Yes,
rail?
both at the $5.2 billion and at the $8.2 billion.
And so we've
level.
expended all of those contingency funds to date.
In the 5.2, we've expended, you're going to have to ask Hart. I mean, we're talking, the 5.2, and then the additional 5 years gets us to Middle Street. I don't know if all the contingency has been expended, but it will be under projections, yes.
I'll save that question. So the next
Okay.
one is in regards to turnover. How many directors and board members have left Hart to date since?
In terms of the Hart Board, there's just one person remaining from the original Hart Board, and that's the chair, Damian Kim, who unfortunately can't be here today because he has union business on Maui. In terms of executive directors, of course, as you know, we had Dan Grabowskis, then we had an interim executive director, and Mike Formby, who I think did a great job, and now we have Murty, who's here also as the interim executive director. And as you know, the Hart Board has chosen a new permanent executive director, and he will be starting on May 5th.
What is the amount of money that you guys spend for the Hart Board and for the directors? What is the budget?
The total budget just for Hart is about $22 million. I don't know how much is actually expended on the Hart Board, although I would assume it's minimal.
So in the relation between the amount of change orders, the over budget, and the amount of staff turnover, you've studied that relation and come up with what as to how we're going to get through that? Seeing as though what you said, there's only one remaining person from the beginning. I guess, what's your strategy? Because we're looking more to the city and county as the managers of Hart. So when things like that happen, we have huge turnover, we have huge change in the price tag of the project. How do you guys deal with that?
So one thing, you look at the city as the managers of Hart. As you know, and you do have a chair here who helped write the charter provision creating Hart. As an independent body, They did not want the mayor or the council making political decisions influencing how this rail project would be built. So the charter, voted for by all the people in this room and on this island, created a semi-independent board where they allow me to appoint 3 members, they allow the council to appoint 3 members, those 6 choose a 7th, and they are the managers of the project. Yes, it is a city project, and as mayor, I'm at the top of that, and I'm not running away from rail, and I put my entire life, political life, on the line for this project. But I just want to clarify that we are not managing this project. We were, when I was the managing director, DTS was the manager through the Rapid Transit Division. That has changed dramatically. What was the second part of your question?
I hear you.
Yeah.
You're getting at it. You're saying that there's multiple people touching this project in regards to who's
in
managing
terms
it.
of, so changeover, I don't know if that's particularly bad in terms of HART board members coming and going. Many boards, as you probably know, in fact, some of the council, the legislature helps select members, turn over at a rate of about 2 or 3 years. So I would prefer there'd be a little bit more consistency, but I think it's not all bad that we have new members of the HART board, and we have some really good ones. As far as the staffing, I am concerned that we be fully staffed up. There are some major pukas that need to be filled. That is part of what some of these audits have pointed out, and they're working hard to fill those pukas. Of course, the biggest one of all is filling the executive director position, which the good news is has now been filled.
My last question is about funding. In your testimony, you said the FTA will allow nothing less. When you made that statement, you mean they will allow nothing less except for going to Ala Moana, or are you talking about a distance of the rail? Are you talking about miles?
So the assumption is we go all the way to Ala Moana. That's what is under the full funding grant agreement, our legal document. When I say nothing less, it's about funding. It's that stress test question that Senator Kai Kahele asked, that they're going to want to see sufficient funds coming out of this session, special session, to get us to Ala Moana. And they need to actually, they set the deadline, a drop-dead absolute deadline of September 15th. And if there isn't sufficient funding at that point, then we have huge problems.
And so there is a letter from the FTA stating that it needs to go to Ala Moana with enough funding, and that's what you guys are trying to meet, or are there other stipulations that FTA has given you guys?
The letter from the FTA that was addressed to HART, I know, has been delivered to every member of the House and Senate. And in that letter, it doesn't get as specific as you said. It just said there is a deadline we're giving to September 15th to come up with adequate funding to honor the full funding grant agreement provisions. It's a legal document that was signed in 2012, just days after the death of our senior Senator Dan Inouye, in his appropriations room. And what it says is that we are committed to building rail from Kroc Center all the way to Ala Moana. It's called the minimum operating segment of a locally preferred alternative, which is actually 26 miles. It goes further into Kapolei and all the way up to Manoa, but we're building the first 20 miles.
Yeah, and my question was in regards to there's been multiple suggestions to end it early, and that's what I'm trying to get at. I did read that letter, but the specifications of FTA and exactly what they're asking us is what we have to match up when we make a decision about how we fund it. So thank you.
So they're asking for funding to Ala Moana.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to take one more question from a House member, then we're going to turn it over back to the Senate. So we're going to go with Vice Chair Collin.
Thank you. Could we have the fiscal person from the city, the guy right there? Yeah, you talk about bonds.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Just a clarifying question. In your slide, you had, let me just bring it up here. You said that real property tax rates will need to be raised to pay additional debt service. How is the city going to pay for any part of rail? Because from my recollection, you guys have an ordinance saying you can't use no county general fund, right?
Yes.
Yes. So how are you guys going to pay it? I'm just trying to figure out, can you pay for the bond, which is a workaround the ordinance, or does the ordinance stop you from paying the bond?
What we're going to do is to use the funds from the general account in the city for the general obligation bonds, and HART is going to reimburse us from their monies on debt service. But the current projections are based on the current numbers. But as you know, the costs are going up, and a potential is that our credit rating might go down.
Wait. So you can use the general account, even though you have an ordinance saying you can't use it for rail, but you can use it to pay for the bond then? Is that what I'm getting from you?
Yes.
So it's a workaround on the ordinance then?
It's the way that we do the bond funding. For the other funds, such as wastewater and the water, they have specific funds from their rate flows. So from the water fees, they use that for the repayment of their bonds.
Maybe the individual
Let
can...
me Peter Biggs, Deputy Director for Budget and Fiscal Services. So I think maybe a little expansion on that. No, we're not intending. I think the scenario that Wayne put forward in his slide related to should there not be additional funding put forward. So we're not paying for any part of the current rail capital costs. It's coming from the GET surcharge and coming from the federal government today. There's no workaround.
Wait. But then Senator Kaikahele mentioned that it's the GO is being paid for, is being covered from the GET then, the current GO that the county just moved?
Correct. The idea is, the current bond issuance that the city is doing for HART, that's being paid for by the GET surcharge.
Right. Okay. Then why would the slide say because it would need to be raised additional costs?
I think that's in the case that should, unfortunately, we not have the extension of the GET surcharge, and should we be faced some position where we are trying to figure out how to complete the rail without the revenue sources that we hope will be available to us.
Okay, so the bond that is being passed is backed by the funding that the state is giving to the counties for rail.
I'm sorry, which bond are you referring to?
The bond that the council saying that they passed.
The $350 million. No, that bond is in fact being repaid from the GET surcharge. So the next 10 years of GET surcharge that we have in place, that $350 million will be repaid from that GET surcharge.
Okay, we just want to get a clarification on top how you guys are paying for the bond, and that's why on the House side we were looking at funding to not pay the debt service during regular session. So thank you.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Revere, is your question to the mayor? Senator Revere, just one comment first. Mayor, one of the questions that Representative Tupolo asked, and you didn't answer, and I think it had to do with the audit. You did an audit in 2015 and 2017. So are you open, as well as the council, to do an annual budget, annual auditing?
Yes.
Going forward?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
I also did want to clarify, when I said there were 7 members of the HART board, there's actually 3 ex officio. One is the Department of Transportation Director for the state. One is the Director of Department of Planning and Permitting, and one is the Director of DTS. So there's 10 full members, but 3 of them are there automatically.
That's fine.
Thank you.
We need to hurry up further. We have a lot more
Yep.
to come before us. Senator Revere, please.
Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning.
Hi. I just want to get back on the minimum operating segment. Wanted to follow up on Rep. Tupolo's line of questioning. I think we all understand the full funding grant is 21 stations, 20 miles, and that. So the full funding grant is very clear what it's called out for. However, for the last couple of years, there seems to have been some ambiguity about what is exactly the minimum operable segment. And I'm wondering, I've never seen it written down that that term, minimal operable segment, is the same as the full funding grant. It seemed to me the MOS was more of a functional definition. Could you please clarify where and if there's something in writing that says the MOS is to Ala Moana Center?
So there is no ambiguity. The MOS is to Ala Moana from the Kroc Center. As far as where it's written down, I'm going to ask Hart to point out where in their provisions are that it says that, but it's there.
Okay, thank you. And then on the on this subject related, the recovery plan that was submitted on April 30th was required by FTA. They asked about a year ago, please come up with a plan, and it was delayed from August to December to April, right?
Yes, I asked for more time from the FDA, and I was hoping they would have given it until the end of session. At the end of the day, it didn't matter that much, but April 30th was a deadline, and they did submit a plan, but it has a giant puka. There's no financial part of it.
And the purpose of that plan was, what is the purpose of that plan? Because I'll note that there was a plan A and a plan B.
So the purpose of the plan is, as a result, because the FDA says you do not have enough money to complete the project all the way to Ala Moana Center, as far as we can see, what is your financial recovery plan to get you there? And if you can't get there, how far could you get?
Why would they ask, how far can you get, if that was not an option?
Because we're faced with a serious problem. If there isn't sufficient funding, then where does that funding end up? And as you see, that I actually went before the board and talked about we have enough money to get to Middle Street. And you saw the huge outcry that resulted from that. Now, I didn't say stop and walk away, but I said build everything 100% to Middle Street, and we'll look for the funding for the rest of the way, which is what we're talking about here today. We're talking about the last 4.8 miles and 8 stations. All other contracts have been either issued and they're proceeding, except for 2. The city center, the 4.8, and a parking garage at Pearl Highlands, which would impact your community who are coming over from the North Shore as they come in town to park and get on the train for the rest of the way to make their commute even shorter.
When I read the recovery plan, I paid special attention to Plan B, which it was stated in that plan that for the existing budget of $6.8 billion, by eliminating stations from Middle Street to Aloha Tower, that the project could, in fact, be delivered to Aloha Tower. And in my interpretation and reading of that, it did seem to imply that that would meet the terms of a minimal operating segment that Hart was asking for consideration. Am I wrong?
I think you're incorrect. I don't think the FTA has weighed in at all of what it will be acceptable to them. I've also seen those figures to Aloha Tower. I've seen them revised further back to Iwilei because of increased cost of construction. And I think that this is all hypothetical until the FTA weighs in. They've told us that any change in the system will require a supplemental EIS. It'll take a year or 2 to complete. This body has asked for a study. Ulupono came up with it about public-private partnerships and financing. They say for every year delay, it costs about another $120 to $150 million more dollars. So there's no guarantee, short of fully building this project out to Ala Moana, that the entire project wouldn't be jeopardized by trying to shorten the system.
Did you just say that we cannot get to Aloha Tower now for the 6.8 that was
I've seen numbers
in the recovery?
I've seen, you can ask Hart, but I've seen numbers that wouldn't even get you to Aloha Tower. And by the way, I mean, if you believe the ridership numbers, I believe them, but if you believe the ridership numbers, if you build from the Kroc Center to Aloha Tower, you get about 60,000 rides. If you build from Kroc Center to Ala Moana Shopping Center, you get another 60,000 rides just in the last 4.8 miles. And why is that? They're not going to the center to go shopping, but ask some of the people in this room, they're going to the center to get on a short bus ride to get into Waikiki, the largest employment center on the island, or up to UH Manoa. If Roger Morton would have finished his presentation, he would have talked about the significance of Ala Moana Center as a bus hub. I can't remember how many hundreds. I mean, I don't. Roger, what's the total rides a day out of Ala Moana on bus?
About 1,500 bus trips a day into Ala Moana.
1,500. But the point is,
Mayor,
it's important to get there because of the ridership number increases for the investment made.
Right, but I'm asking about the recovery plan, and I'm pretty sure I just heard you say that we cannot get to Aloha Tower now for $6.8 billion because the numbers have gone up. That then
6.8, by the way, gets you to Middle Street.
That then makes me want to know how come the numbers for the total project have not changed since this crisis erupted over a year ago. And I note that the price was on time, on budget in 2014, and then it was 900 million short, and then it was like, well, if $1.5 billion we can get there. And then as soon, man, the ink wasn't even dry on the paperwork from the city when suddenly it's, oh, it's not $1.5 billion, it's $2.5 billion. And I noticed the price really hasn't changed in the last year or so. So I just, please mark me in that group that is very incredulous about the cost and what this thing is going to cost.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Thielen, followed by Senator Kahili. Who's your question for? For Mayor, please.
Mr. Mayor? Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to get a clarification. I think a couple sessions ago, the request from the city was for a 5-year extension, and it was very specific in time. And then in last session, my understanding was the request was for a very specific 10-year period, in part because that would allow the city to issue bonds, and according to the city, that would raise the revenue for the project. And so that was the request. What I'm hearing today, it sounds different, and that's what I want the clarification for. What I'm hearing today is the request from the executive and legislative council branch is to finish the funding to finish the project to Ala Moana, which is different than saying a 10-year extension. And you were saying earlier, if it were finished for less money, then the state could end that rail surcharge or do what it liked. Is the converse true? If the project price goes up beyond the $8.2 billion, or the finance charges are higher than the $10.2 billion, is the city going to be back to ask for that surcharge to be extended beyond the 10 years? Is the ask today to get to Ala Moana regardless of what the cost is?
No, the ask is not to get to Ala Moana regardless of the cost. The ask is for sufficient funds to get to Ala Moana and never having to come back here again. And that's why I am asking for 10 years. Now, I believe there is a potential surplus, and that's where, if it looks that way, that the surcharge would end. But I want to correct something you stated earlier about an ask from the city. My ask throughout my time as mayor coming up to this body has actually been in perpetuity, because I do believe this system is going to be extended to other places on this island. And other legacy systems around this country have collection systems, a sales tax that's in perpetuity to build systems. So that's been my ask. Now, when I've been pushed, I've retreated to 25 years, 15 years, and 10. I wish 2 years ago we would have had 25 years, because we wouldn't be here today putting you through this scenario that we're faced, and that we'd have sufficient funds to complete the project. And then we could talk about what do we do after that. Do we go up to UH Manoa? Do we go into Kapolei? Do we go to Salt Lake? So I just wanted to correct that. Thank you.
But again, so what you're asking, what the city is asking for currently is the funds to get to Ala Moana.
Correct.
All right. And if it is the cost is going to be more than $10.2 billion, including the finance charges, then the city will be back to ask for an extension beyond the 10 years?
Okay, I've answered that question. I'll answer it a second time. We're asking for a sufficient amount of money to build Ala Moana. And I believe 10 years is sufficient with a surplus to get to Ala Moana.
Then I guess I have a follow-up question, that standing here today, if we pass something in special session and then we go to the FTA and there's a stress test and they say that your $8.2 billion projections are incorrect and it's going to be more, are we going to be back next session with a request from the city to extend beyond the 10 years to meet the new financial projections?
I think I covered that in my first point, is we need sufficient funding to get all the way to Ala Moana, stress tested by the FTA. And the last thing I want to do is come back here again. And that's why we need to put a sufficient source of funding at the end of this special session that we do not come back.
Then is 10 years sufficient? Or
Yes.
are you going to be asking for something longer, given that there's going to be a stress test and updated financial projections?
This is the fourth time I'll answer your question.
We had answers 2 years ago.
On
and we're back.
GET, I'm asking for 10 more years of GET to get us to Ala Moana. And I believe that when it's stressed, it will be sufficient to still get us to Ala Moana without us ever having to come back here again.
And Chair, if I may, I just have a final question. I think there are quite a large number of people that are skeptical that the $8.2 billion figure is going to be accurate, given that the most expensive portion going into urban Honolulu has not yet been bid out. Is there a price at getting to Ala Moana where you would say that the city does need to take a look at alternatives? If it were to come out at $15 billion as opposed to $10.2 billion, would you be looking at alternatives under that scenario?
I'm not going to speculate. I believe, I'm going to say it again, I believe 10 years is sufficient to get to Ala Moana. So I'm not going to play the what if it isn't, because I believe there is sufficient funds to get us all the way to Ala Moana.
Okay, well, Mr. Mayor, in closing, 4 years ago, we were told that a certain amount was sufficient funds. 2 years ago, we were told that a certain amount was sufficient funds. So I don't think that these examples or questions that I'm raising are wild hypotheticals. So
I understand your concern, and I share it in terms of increasing cost. But I'm answering the question as best I can in terms of the money that we need to get to Ala Moana, and I think I've answered it a number of times at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Before we proceed, Senator Kahele, you'll be the last. Mayor, just an announcement. We will not be breaking for a lunch break. However, we have testimonies, I understand, from HSEC, and all the council members who are here. Will you already please start lining up, because I'm not sure who's here to testify, and as we see some of the council members. So please start lining up before we go into the last question as well.
Thank you,
And Hart will follow the council members. And members, if you disagree and you want to take a break, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor, one last question. And I couldn't echo Representative Lopresti's comments anymore, in particular to what might not necessarily be a funding mechanism, but I think it's something that's very important to the public and to this body, and that's accountability. Accountability for the rail project. There's been a lot of statements in the media recently about audits. And you mentioned an audit earlier that you had talked about. And people have tossed around the term forensic audit. And, you know, by definition, a forensic audit is an examination or an evaluation of Hart's financing or the way they've done business in the past that could be used as evidence in court. It could be used for prosecution, for fraud and things like that. So there's a big difference between an audit and a forensic audit. It's been in the news recently. I want to hear what your opinion is on looking at a forensic audit prior to the 2011 creation of Hart.
I support any audit that should be undertaken to get us the answers we need to make sure, to address Senator Thielen's concern, that the money we have, we're asking for, is sufficient to get us all the way to Ala Moana, encountering the problems that we know we'll run into. Looking back, I don't think is a bad thing to see what kind of things could we have done better so they don't repeat them going forward. I don't want to get caught up in this term forensic. I mean, my experience, I practiced law for 30 years before I came into city government, and usually when you did a forensic audit, it was getting ready for litigation. As mayor, I'm not looking for litigation here. We saw what litigation did at the beginning of the project, where it delayed the start of it, and we got kicked into a very hot construction market, which actually is believe is the real reason we see the cost so high. Yes, change orders have contributed too, but no doubt the change our construction market had a major impact. So I don't want to get caught up in the terminology, but getting an audit done that is thorough, complete, looks at the past, looks at the present, and says what we can do better in the future, I'm on board 100% to get done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. HSAC or any council members representing their counties? Oh, you have more questions? I'm sorry. The House members have some questions.
Okay. So, House members, we're going to have another round of questioning for the city. So, Rep. Holt, followed by Rep. Hashem.
Thank you, Chair. For the mayor, just real quick. Oh, you went out the door. Okay, Council Chair Minor. So I'm in support of this project, but just more specifically about the funding mechanism. You know, the mayor has repeatedly said that the GET is the easiest way to go about it, and you know, I was in support of that when GET was the only on the table, but now we have TAT, and when we can tax the tourists versus taxing our residents. You know, that's $1 on a $100 hotel room versus 50 cents on $100 of groceries. So how do you guys come and tell them that we should continue to tax our residents versus spread the burden to our the tourists?
Well, as I indicated, I think the preferred approach is to extend the surcharge. I think that the majority of our constituents would accept that. I also indicated in my earlier testimony that the bottom line is our concern that with respect to whatever funding measure the legislature comes up with, that it will generate sufficient revenue for us to complete the project to Ala Moana as required under the full funding grant agreement. And I would note that I have the full funding grant agreement with me, and the agreement definitely and clearly references completion to Ala Moana, so that's a part of the agreement. Now, as far as the TAT, you know, that's a policy decision that the legislature is going to have to make in special session. I have concerns about the impact that an increase in the TAT might have on our visitor industry, and that's why, with respect to proposals that came before the City Council in reviewing the fiscal year 2018 budget, we looked at proposals to increase the real property tax rate with respect to the hotels and resort destinations. We looked at that issue very carefully, and we proceeded very cautiously and prudently in resolving and responding to that particular issue. So we'll leave it to your best judgment. Our biggest concern is, again, that you provide us with the funding mechanism so we can complete the rail.
So would you guys be more supportive of the TAT if we were to restore some of your guys' funding levels? I know you guys are talking that we're going to cut it. I don't believe that was in any of the proposals, but you know, I think we're looking to help everybody, and so if you guys need more money to help your counties, we need more money for the rail project, maybe we can win for everybody. So thank you, guys.
We'll keep an open mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Rep Hashem, followed by Rep Ward.
Okay. This would be for Hart. Anybody from Hart? Hello? They didn't present yet? or-
Yeah, Hart will be presenting, and any questions will should be.
Mayor's not here, so.
We're doing the council first, members.
Okay, well, somebody from the
So-
mayor's administration then, but it could go to Hart.
Mayor.
I'll wait till Hart comes out after.
Wait for the mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. Rep Ward.
Who can speak for the mayor? Or is the mayor outside in the lobby and he's going to come back in, or he didn't just go to the Lua?
He said he was going to.
Who among you can speak for the mayor? I want to commend him on his brevity in that his 3 points that he made, I wanted to ask him whether they were conditional or were they demands. The question is, whoever can answer it. The second demand was, we will not pass anything that is a takeaway from any of your services. In other words, no special session caveats that say, if we give you this, we take away that. Is that what he said? Did he mean to make that a demand, to kind of tie the hands of what otherwise some of our committee people always have caveats in their wordsmithing?
Okay, Rep Ward.
I don't see any takers. Okay, I'm
Rep Ward,
Mr.
sorry.
Morton.
We're going to take a quick recess to see if the mayor is still here. Thank you.
And I'll come back then.
Testing. All right, the break is over. Council members, are you ready? We will proceed with HSAC or whomever is here from the county councils of the islands. And then we'll follow by heart. Will everyone have their seats, please?
Okay. Aloha and thank you, Chair. Aloha, I'm Councilmember Stacy Crivella from Maui County Council. We're coming here today in support of our sister counties.
1 second, please. Can you lower your voices, please? Let's start.
Thank you. As mentioned, I'm Stacy Helm Crivello from the Maui County Council, and on behalf of the HSAC, or Hawaii State Association of Councils Executive Committee, we'd like to just read off our written testimony that as a county, we come in together to support the Hawaii State Legislature's approval of an extension of the Honolulu General Excise and Use Tax Surcharge to enable the completion of the minimum operable segment of the Honolulu's high-capacity transit corridor project to Ala Moana Center. I'd like to add that we would also like the Hawaii State Legislature to support transparency and accountability. As mentioned, thank you for affording us this opportunity. And again, we come in together as sister counties. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you for being here. Next.
Aloha and good morning, Chair, and all the other members.
Yes, aloha.
So nice to see some old friends and some new faces. I join my fellow county colleagues across the state and concur with the Hawaii State Association of Counties' position to fund rail by extending the existing general excise tax surcharge for Oahu. An extension of the GET surcharge will generate enough revenue to cover the expected shortfall. If the additional funds are needed, a slight increase to the surcharge along with the extension would generate significantly more funds. There's no justification to increase any statewide taxes to pay for Oahu's rail. Neighbor island economies are far smaller and in need of support rather than further burdens. Due to factors such as access and cost to travel beyond Oahu, Oahu enjoys occupancies that are generally about 14 points, or about 20% higher than neighbor island averages. Oahu's occupancies are generally about 10 points ahead of Maui's, 13 points ahead of Kauai's, and nearly 20 points ahead of the island of Hawaii. Contrary to what Department of Taxation reports say, and many believe, Oahu does not generate 85% of statewide TAT. Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii counties generate about 51% of TAT revenues compared to Oahu's 49%. For fiscal year 2017, it's estimated that $259 million will be generated by the neighbor islands and approximately $249 million on Oahu. To increase TAT at this time is unwarranted. The state's share of the TAT will be about $326 million in fiscal year 2018, up $96 million in just 2 years. Setting aside just that increased portion of the TAT for rail and applying an annual growth rate of 5% would fund more than 95% of the projected deficit without a rate increase. The state's share of the TAT has grown by over $300 million in the last 10 years. Rather than increasing the tax rate when the state is enjoying rapid TAT revenue growth, other means of revenue generation remain on the table. Relatively simple amendments could result in significant growth in revenues. First, amending the current law to collect TAT from wholesalers and online travel companies such as Travelocity, Expedia, Hotels.com, and so forth, as was I was going to skip over that. In 2015, Hawaii State Supreme Court ruled that OTCs were subject to the GET and penalties on their portion of the gross income from sales or visitor accommodations in Hawaii. But they are not subject to TAT. Several states have rewritten their TAT statutes to make remarketers responsible for TAT collection as well as operators. That has solved the problem, and according to UH Economic Research Organization, the changes have withstood court challenges. Number two, reviewing the taxation methodology on transient occupancy tax, which is charged on all timeshare properties. As you know, the current method of taxing timeshare occupancy, which is their visitors just like those that stay in hotels and condominiums, they're taxed at a rate of 0.5% of their maintenance fee as opposed to on a fair market value. Number three, work with the counties to create a mechanism to identify vacation rental properties, working with companies such as Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and other platforms to ensure that they're operating legally and paying the appropriate amount of taxes. Increasing statewide taxes now, especially on a tax like the TAT, could have negative implications on our economies. Most visitors have a fixed budget for their vacation, and an increase in the room tax will simply lead to less spending on restaurants, retail, and activities. A 1% increase in the TAT this year would direct nearly $30 million to state coffers instead of remaining in our neighbor island communities and economies. With all these variables at play, I would like to reiterate the Hawaii State Association of Counties' position that an extension of the Oahu GAT surcharge is the best way to move forward. You have many difficult funding challenges ahead of you, and we all recognize that. The counties have many challenges as well. We on the neighbor islands look to all of you for thoughtfulness, fairness, and leadership during your decision making. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide my testimony.
Thank you, Mike. Any other member, council member from the neighbor islands as well? Otherwise, we're going to start with Hart. Okay, sure. Any questions, members, from the council members or? Yes, there's nobody here. You guys okay? Any questions raised? Senator Kahili, question to whom?
Is there some, who spoke on behalf of the Hawaii State Association of Counties?
I think it was Stacy.
Stacy. Okay.
Stacy, is she here? Oh, okay.
Stacy, you good right there. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I should give it up. Thank you, Stacy. Sorry for making you walk all the way back around.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at HSAC's testimony that you submitted on Friday, and I just wanted to be clear because you don't address the potential TAT funding mechanism. You say that the HSAC unilaterally supports, and you passed a resolution to support a general excise tax surcharge extension, but you give no opinion or position on the TAT. I know what Mr. White said, but what is the position of HSAC?
HSAC, exactly as we proposed, in support of reauthorization of the existing GET tax.
Does HSAC oppose the TAT statewide increase?
No, we didn't. We're not. We're staying clear out of the TAT.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, on behalf of HSAC. But Maui County, we have our opinions as far as when it comes to the TAT.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions, members? Okay, we're going to roll along with the rail. Oh, One second, House members, sorry.
Rep. Tokioka.
Stacy or Mike?
Or both of you. So, as the state is in fiscal hardships with all of the agencies and the bills and EUTF and ERS that we have, the county in a similar situation. So if this bill does pass, the counties are going to be able to increase the 0.5% to the GET for the county to keep in their county.
We have not addressed the, we're looking at what Honolulu City and County is requesting, the reauthorization of your existing GET.
Right, but if we open that door, then the three neighbor island counties will have that opportunity to be a part of.
And we'll continue that discussion when it should arise and have that dialogue among our colleagues.
Because it's my understanding that Kauai and the Big Island, I don't know if, I saw Chair Raposo here, I don't know if he's still here. Council Chair Poindexter, do you want to comment?
Well, maybe Mike, you can also
I'll have our chair
comments.
from the Maui County Council speak on that.
And Mike, you're a hotel guy, so you know.
Yeah,
you know what the TAT generates for you, for all of the counties.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one in the room who is a payer of TAT, a recipient of TAT, and an appropriator of TAT. But as such, the reason that the Maui County Council has not taken the state up on the issue of the 0.5% surcharge for our county is that we already have a generation of about $155 million in TAT that Maui generates, and we get back this coming year 21 million of that. So if the state, my view has always been the GET is the state's tax. And across the nation, the taxes on lodging revenues are generally more of a local tax than a state tax.
Okay. So the answer is on Maui County for now, no. And none of the counties, as we all know, none of the counties,
none of the counties
had 2 opportunities, I believe, to do it, and then no one did.
Right.
Okay.
And I think any decision on a tax is based on what amount of money you're going to get as a result of that tax. And for us to replace a visitor-generated tax that covers visitor services, fire, police, and parks mainly, that's really where we should be taking the revenue, not from an excise tax that is paid for by everybody. So to put in perspective, over the last 10 years, while the state share has gone up by about $300 million, our share of the TAT has dropped from almost 101 to 93. During that same time, the cost just for Maui, for fire, police, and parks, the cost of those operations has increased by $60 million, actually over $60 million. For the state, the 4 counties, the cost of operating just police, fire, and parks has gone up by $264 million. So we've made up the difference by increasing our property taxes, and we just don't think that it's fair for us to transfer the cost of visitor services to our local residents.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Madam Chair, can I ask the Big Island County?
Yes, and just for the record, this County Council of the Big Island has not turned in testimonies or took a position, but they are members of HSAC. And just for the record as well, Office of Mayor, his testimony is just to keep the surcharge on Oahu only. Thank you. You can proceed. Thank you.
And aloha, Valerie Poindexter, Council Chair, Hawaii County
Council. And yes, I was notified by our HSAC president, and I'm the alternate, so I was asked to come in Councilmember Drew Kanuha's place for HSAC, but I'm also here as the County Council Chair. And I did hear the question about how did we feel about the opportunity to give us opportunity to discuss increasing our GET. And I think the opportunity would be welcomed. We recently had some discussion as far as, you know, which battle do we want to take? Do we want to keep battling TAT, or do we want to look at the opportunity and start the discussion on the possibility of increasing the GT? So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. And I saw Chairman Raposo walk in. And another part of this is to give the counties that opportunity, if this bill should pass, to utilize the GET as another funding source.
Yeah, and I think we would welcome the discussion because there's always pros and cons, and people have been talking about the GET, you know, affecting more of the residents, but I see it affecting all of the visitors as well, and looking at possibilities of ways to possibly exempt food and medication, because we know that our Hawaii Island and our seniors are on fixed incomes, and when we talk about raising GET, we're looking at medication and food. So if we can look, I don't know if there is ways to exempt that, but it's worth the discussion. So I appreciate that, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Chairman Raposo, you want to? Yeah. Well, the question was asked to the councils when you left the room, and the question was asked: if this bill does pass, you folks have an opportunity to increase the GET on each and every island county. And so Maui said at this point probably no. Chair Poindexter said they want to look at it. So this is your opportunity, Chairman Raposo.
I can only speak for myself. I think, you know, we didn't pass it the last go around. I think on Kauai, the council may have softened on that stance. I'm not sure. I mean, we really haven't had that discussion. But you know, for me, it's and I've made this point on numerous occasions that the problem I have with the GET is the restriction of the use. I for the life of me can't figure out why the state would want to limit the use of those funds by the counties. I don't understand why it wouldn't come as funds for the counties to use as they need. And just for an example, for Kauai, a 0.5% increase is $25 million a year. You know, we can't pay $25 million a year on Kauai. It's just not possible, not logistically possible. So I just don't see the need to have that restriction put in. And I've said this. If it came across to us where we could use the funds as we need to for affordable housing or for homelessness, I support it. But with the restriction to transportation and roads, I just have a difficult time. But that's just myself. And
there was some discussion of the creativity of some of the counties to figure out how they could use it within their budgets. And I understand what you're saying.
I know we both know. I mean, there's some creativity, you know, hey, just rob Peter to pay Paul. I'm just saying, why does the state have to have a restriction?
Well, I think that started when the whole rail project went, because that was specifically what the request was through HSAC, which you were a part of at that time, that was the way the bill was going to pass. But
we don't have a rail on Kauai. We won't have a rail on Kauai.
Okay.
But we definitely have a homeless problem. We definitely have a homeless problem.
We have a train, though, now.
Yeah, we got the Kolo train.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. House members, any other questions?
Senator Kahile.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, the mayor did tell us, the committee, that he had already committed on his schedule for the afternoon, and he would be available in the morning. And so he will not be returning. However, we do have Chief of Staff here, Gary Kurokawa. If the question can be asked, do you still want to talk to the Chief of Staff, Senator? Okay.
Chair Poindexter.
Okay. Can we continue first Rep Ward with regards to questions of the county councils. Then Senator Kahili, you're going to continue.
Aloha, Chair.
Aloha.
Always good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So, I'm not sure exactly what proposal we've been talking about for the last 2 or 3 hours because I haven't seen a proposal yet.
Right.
But different iterations and proposals over the last 4 months have included lowering TAT to 80 million, with 13 million being the county's share, the neighbor islands and county share to rail. I've seen 93 million. I've seen 103 million. There was a Senate version over the course of the legislature that was going to increase TAT to 108 million. That obviously would either increase or decrease the County of Hawaii's share in that TAT. And right now, I'm not sure exactly where that is. But my question to you is, as the chair, what did Hawaii County do this past year to offset the decrease in revenue? When Mayor Kim's representative came to the WAM finance hearing at the beginning of session, he was adamant of not increasing or taking the 0.5% surcharge for Hawaii County that Chair Raposo had talked about. And he was adamant about not increasing taxes. And so the legislature wants to know, where's the skin in the game for the County of Hawaii? So what did the County of Hawaii do this year in regards to RPT and fuel taxes?
Right. We raised taxes, definitely. Both real property tax and our fuel taxes was raised. In order to meet the deficit in to balance the budget.
So there is a direct correlation between the TAT's allocation to the counties versus what?
The TAT, the reduction in that did affect our budget, definitely.
Okay. Out of curiosity, how much did the county have to raise fuel taxes this year?
Off the top of my head, I just don't have that, but you can quickly get it on our website.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you. Aloha.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. More. Rep Ward, did you have a question? We are proceeding with Hart, but you did have a question you wanted for the mayor, but the chief of staff is here. Do you want him to answer your question? If it's not, and he may not, he's not coming back. He's not returning. Are you conceding? Okay, otherwise we're going to be moving with rail. And if you can think of something.
No, I have the, whether he can speak for the mayor, I'm not sure. Where's the gentleman?
Chief of staff is here.
Where is he?
Gary, can you come up, sir. Gary Kurokaro?
A vicarious question to you, sir.
You have a question.
What if we just don't have a special session and we wait until January? Will the sky fall? Because I don't see a proposal, I don't see a consensus. This morning, in emerging of data and an understanding.
My understanding is that the FDA is requiring some resolution to the financing by September 15th.
But I mean, that's how many times have they said that? We've missed how many times already, and we're still alive.
I can only tell you what the FDA has transmitted to HART and the city. I'm sure you saw that letter that was submitted by the FDA.
Exactly, except we had seen others in the past. Anyway, that was the sense, because, I mean, we could have a special session and have a hung jury at the same time. We don't necessarily come out with what may be maybe the assumption, particularly when the mayor gave us 3 conditions, of which, did you hear my other question about why did the mayor say no takeaways? Don't restrict our use of money of this if you give us this money? What did he mean by that?
Yeah.
I think what the mayor is saying is that, the city, as you saw, we tried to present, the city is currently, investing a lot of money, whether through special funds or through our general funds and other things. In the short, we'll be looking at having to fund operating and maintenance expenses in the near future. And I think what he's saying is that, right now, his position is that we don't want to use any of our general fund money because it will be a burden to our taxpayers to fund the construction of rail.
I'm going to interrupt. Council members, there's going to be more questions of you, so don't leave. Sorry for the interruption, Gary. Please proceed.
And I think, that's the position today.
Well, I think one of the caveats that the Finance Committee had put in was that you would pay for your administrative, your overhead, your rent, the employees' building and other administrative stuff. Does what the mayor say we will not include that kind of stuff? So we go against what?
Well, all those expenses would have to come out of our general fund and, again, towards our taxpayers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe Chair Luke has a question.
For HSAC, let me see.
Question is for HSAC, Stacy or Mike?
So relating to GET for Oahu, there are legislators who believe that the GET on Oahu is not a tax on Oahu residents only, because they heard from businesses and folks from the neighbor islands who said they have to pay as a business expense for the increase in GET that Oahu County raised. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I'm from the island of Molokai. So aside from raising our own produce, basically everything comes from Oahu. And it's a pyramid, so we pick up the taxes. Likewise, I guess with the neighbor islands, our visitors will pay into the GET. So it is statewide, but basically on the everyday purchases, I see it, and I'm sure my colleagues on HSAC sees it as taxation that is directly into with the residents.
So although the Oahu surcharge is borne significantly by Oahu residents, the impact on neighbor island is still present.
It's still present, and it has been. It always has been.
Okay.
It's nothing new for us.
And because of that, there are some legislators, neighbor island legislators, who voted against the GET increase for rail, and that was the reason.
I understand, but I also know that it's federal monies that we're sort of obliged to in responding to completing the rail. So, and we're all intertwined, and when it comes to the GET, it's not new for neighbor islands to pay the costs of as for consumers. We do that anyway, and I don't see this as a GET increase. we see this as reauthorization of what is already existing.
So as long as, I understand that you recognize that.
We
GET
recognizes, I'm from the island of Molokai.
Yeah, GET.
And it's
Oahu
GET,
is,
and we pick up everything from Oahu. We're taxed with it. We know that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other House members with questions? Rep. Kobayashi.
For whom? Question.
Question for Ron Menor. Ron, in your statement, written statement, you said that current estimates, including capital and financing costs, are more than $2.5 billion short.
That's correct.
How much of this $2.5 billion plus is for capital, and how much for financing costs?
Okay, I'm going to defer to the specific
I understand
figures.
that almost all of this is for financing costs of the $2.5 billion.
A significant portion of it would be. But as far as the specific amounts and how that would be allocated between capital and finance charges, the council is basing our estimates on those that we've received from HART, as well as that have been vetted by the administration through the Department of Budget and Fiscal Services. So as far as how it all breaks out, I'm sure HART can further clarify that for you.
And this $2.5 billion shortfall is based on the extension of the GET only.
That's correct.
Okay. So how do you feel about your constituents being taxed, say, an additional $2 billion in GET, and most of this money going to the mainland for finance costs?
Well, if the legislature could come up with a position or measure that would reduce or minimize the finance charges and provide more of that funding up front, of course, the council will be very open to that kind of a position or proposal. Our biggest concern is if we go with that approach again, that bottom line, that whatever revenues are generated will allow us to complete a rail according to the minimum operating segment. The other way we look at it is the fact that when we look at large construction projects, CIP projects, all of that is basically financed through the issuance of bonds that require the payment of debt service. So with respect to major highway improvements, with respect to major city roadway improvements, when we float bonds, there is going to be that aspect that will require that that the legislative body set aside monies to pay for the debt service. So in that regard, when you look at rail, it would be comparable to the way we treat other major construction projects. And then the other point that I would make is the fact that when we talk about building rail and completing it, we're talking about not only addressing the transportation needs of our residents who currently reside on this island, but we're also talking about the future generations of Hawaii citizens who down the road would
you understand that the only way the legislature can give more upfront money into financing costs would be either to raise GET above the 0.5% add-on or increase TAT.
I understand that. If that's
so, which would you prefer?
Again, I would prefer extending the surcharge, and I think that's the fairest and most straightforward way of doing it.
You're okay with $2 billion of taxpayer money, most of it paid for by Hawaii residents and Hawaii businesses, leaving Hawaii, going to mainland banks and bankers? $2 billion leaving Hawaii.
You know, you're discussing a very complex fiscal issue.
Not complex.
Well, there are pros and cons. You know, when you talk about significantly increasing the TAT, I think the question that needs to be raised is to what extent will that impact our visitor industry that represents our economic engine in this state? When you talk about increasing the GET further, the concern about regressivity becomes even more pertinent and relevant. So we're open to whatever proposals the legislature comes up with, but we need to take a look at the specifics and how that would impact the various kinds of concerns that I've just raised. But again, the most straightforward way is to extend the surcharge. But as far as looking at alternatives, as I said, bottom line, we will take a look at whatever the legislature would propose, and we're very grateful for the fact that the legislature is giving this serious consideration and is looking into going into special session to resolve this very critical transportation issue.
Okay, thank you very much. House members, any other questions for HSAC or any council member present? Rep. Keo Kalole.
Thank you, Chair. Is the mayor's off, the bond guy, still here?
We can excuse the council then.
Yeah. Sorry, I stepped out, so this is my opportunity to ask the question.
Excuse me, members, just for your info, can we excuse the council members? There are some here from neighbor islands, so any questions is going to be raised for council members? Okay, seeing none from the neighbor islands?
Peter Biggs.
Okay, nonetheless, we'll excuse them then. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Chair. Hi, Peter. So, okay, the question is, when you folks did residential A property taxes a couple years ago, did that affect the bond rating?
It did not.
Oh, it didn't?
No, I think it was actually looked at favorably by the credit rating agencies, but it didn't have an immediate impact on the bond rating.
So raising property taxes affected the city's bond rating favorably?
They saw it as a way of generating revenue, yes. There was no actual impact, but I think in general, the bond rating agencies saw that as a way that we could generate revenue. Correct.
So I'm confused as to why the argument today that using real property taxes
I think it's
in this
the
context would negatively impact the city's bond rating.
Correct. What we were looking at here is the ability, the necessity in completing rail to issue large quantities of bonds. Should there not be the revenue source. So those large sources of bonds would also come with the ability to having to repay them. So it's, while Res A generated some additional revenue for the city, it did not place undue burden on large groups of people. So this is a nature of scale here, too.
Because I'm sorry. Okay, because I was confused about
it's a nature of scale. The amount of bonds that would have to be issued, the impact on where we would generate that additional revenue from among the current revenue sources that we have is quite different when you consider that impact as opposed to what we did with Res A.
Okay, what I'm getting at is if. I guess the red line is using any sort of property tax revenue to go to the rail, and I understand that's the city's position on that. I can respect the position, but to say that the reason is that it'll negatively affect your bond rating, I don't quite understand. What if you folks did a super res A just for gentleman farms or the residences that the wealthy sort of snowbirds utilize, during the winter months and don't stay in during the rest of the year? Those folks aren't tourists. They don't pay TAT because they own these large estates. Why don't we tax Zuckerberg? Well, Zuckerberg lives on Kauai, but there's got to be some billionaires I have them in my district that don't utilize their property year-round, and they don't pay that much GET because they're not here, and they don't pay TAT because they don't stay in hotels. If you folks decided to go after them and have them pay their fair share of the rail cost.
Well, Res A essentially imposes a higher real property tax rate on people who don't have homeowners exemptions and have properties that are valued at above $1 million.
Right, but I guess what I'm getting at is the argument is that you can't go that route because it's going to negatively impact your bond rating. I understand that the real property tax is widely unpopular. I've heard that from my constituent. To use it for rail, I can understand that and respect that. But I don't understand how saying that it's tied to the negative
Again,
impacts on your bond rating.
yeah.
Or,
The issue here is one of scale. The amount of new bonds that would have to be issued, the additional amount of revenue, should there not be a revenue source such as the GET extension, it would be much more significant than the modest increase that occurred in revenue generation when we imposed the residential A category.
okay, so it's not a large enough, consistent funding stream to account for the bonds that you want to take out to cover the cost. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, House members. Any other questions? Rep. Cachola.
City administration. Since the mayor is not here, I heard him telling us that the 4.8 miles has already contracted out. That correct?
Which section are you referring to, the city center or the airport?
The remaining portion of the line.
It's not contracted.
That's what he said. 4.8 miles.
I think it's 4.2 miles from Middle Street to Ala Moana, and it has not been contracted.
Not yet contracted out.
No.
Okay. Have you tried requesting FTA to extend the deadline of September 15?
I believe that Hart has been in contact with the FTA, and it is something that they have discussed.
And did they say no? Because other jurisdiction, when they ask, they gave extension. Is that one of the ways you're telling us to put a gun on our head that says, if you don't act by September 15, that's it?
I think the original deadline was in April, and I think we have extended to the September 15th deadline, and I think that's the last drop dead date that I have heard from the FTA.
Yeah, because there's a lot more things to be done. Forensic audits got to be done. Others are requesting that. You will hear that when people will testify. And that's why I said, is it possible to extend?
At this time, I don't think so. You might be able to ask Hart that question, but from what we understand, it's
better look into that. And then clarify whether or not the 4.8 miles has already been contracted out. The other thing that I want to ask is, what's your priority project in the city and county of Honolulu?
I think the mayor has his priorities.
So the rail?
Rail is one of the projects, yes.
No, I said the top priority.
I think he has a number of projects that he's equally prioritized, including housing. Rail is one of them. We've also looked at our infrastructure and parks. I think they're all equally important. I know rail is very important. And we're trying to resolve that funding issue through a GET extension.
I'll give you a suggestion. They're looking at improving Blaisdell. Is that the top priority?
I think, for the city's infrastructure, we are still looking at making sure that our buildings and our facilities are still being maintained going forward. The Blaisdell is over 50 years old.
Because you can delay Blaisdell and use the funds to improve it for rail. And then the other thing, Kapalama Canal. Why are we doing that? Why not use the funds for rail so that at least we can say that the city has put at least $1 to the project? They haven't put any dollar at all.
I think, the answer to that is if we're listening to the presentation that was before you, city is spending about $1.2 billion in infrastructure and other costs outside of GET money. This is coming from our taxpayers. This is our money that we are putting into the project currently.
Gary, don't raise your voice.
No, I'm sorry for raising my voice, but I'm trying to.
Okay. Kapalama Canal, why are we doing that? Put a bridge over Kapalama Canal and other things like that.
That's part of our, TOD and Kapalama. These are things that will be coming in the future, but I think if we don't plan today for these things, it will be a big mistake going forward with our housing projects and our, TOD development.
I have two more questions.
Sure.
Are you folks fully understand that the state is short of funds to cover all our needs based on the latest report?
I think the state, like the city, is very looking for funding. I mean, we're always looking for funding. I understand the issues with ERS, employee benefits and other things. And yes, we are very well aware of that.
So more or less, when it comes to funding the rail, okay with you guys? So when we try to cover all the shortage that we have, it's okay for you guys, for us to raise GET for our needs?
Well, I think, we're just asking for the authority right now to do an extension. I think the city council will be the one that is actually raising the GET on the city and county of Honolulu taxpayers.
Lastly, when are you folks going to repeal the ordinance that we set up way back in 2007 when I was there, wherein no city funds will be used for the rail project? Because you are always saying that so that you will not be using city funds at all. But the first thing you got to do is repeal that. When are you folks going to repeal that?
My understanding is that that bill is, going through the steps. It's in the the council right now. It's been deferred.
It has been there for quite some time. No action. Why?
We're looking at seeing what kind of funding sources that will be made available for us with the rail project.
So that's another gun on our head. Do your things first before we repeal it. Is that what it is?
I don't think that's our intention. But that bill is in the city council and waiting to be passed. It is not scheduled for any hearings presently, though.
Okay, let them do it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to again remind all members that to keep your questions concise so that we're able to proceed in a good fashion so that we can get as much input from the audience as well as members' questions out there, okay? Thank you very much. Vice Chair Collin. Council Chairman Ortiz.
Thank you. The question is along the lines of the previous questions I had regarding the bonding and the payment for the bond. So it can be a simple yes or no answer. So before any property tax or city general fund money be used for rail, you, the council, need to work with the mayor on repealing the ordinance that was just mentioned by Representative Cachola.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair Luke.
I have a question for Gary. Okay, so based on the testimony and the responses so far, I don't really get the feeling that the city administration really understand what the legislature is trying to do, and I don't think you folks have an appreciation of what you need to do. So, for instance, the GET extension for 10 years, as Representative Kobayashi stated, that's based on your numbers, includes over $2 billion of financing. $2 billion of financing, which the Oahu and which impacts neighbor islands as well, residents have to pay. But if we were to find additional tax revenues to close that financing gap and reduce the financing charges and front the money more, it provides certainty to the project, number one, and it will save the Oahu residents over $1 billion in financing. So with those type of issues, why isn't the city, the council members, and the city taking a more aggressive approach, especially in light of the fact that GET collections have flattened to a point where, it's coming under the projected amount of 3.5% or the projected amount of 4.5%. As a financing guy, I would think you would at least have the appreciation of what the legislature is trying to do.
No, I think, we do understand, your position and how the financing of the interest is of top of mind, and that by front-loading, it does reduce the financing costs. We do understand that philosophy and how you're trying to address that, and
Does
we
that
appreciate
make
that.
fiscal and financial sense?
I think that if you have the money like anybody else, if you can pay cash for a car, you should, or for your house. But I think that for the most part, when you're struggling and you're strapped for money, that you might look at some kind of financing options. And, and like most projects, I think CIP, large projects like our Kekitano or all other big projects, we do finance, and there is financing cost to it.
Clear. I understand that, but currently GET is being used for financing charges because, by year 2020 or 2021, the expenses that HART projects is close to $1 billion, whereas GET collections will be about $350 million. What I don't understand is why isn't the city and the council being more aggressive in closing that gap and leaving the Oahu taxpayers the burden to pay the additional $2 billion of financing charges? Isn't it your responsibility and the council's responsibility to look at ways to reduce the tax burden on Oahu residents, as opposed to saying GET is the most expedient way? If there's an avenue for us to look at to reduce that burden, over $1 billion now. $1 billion is not something to laugh at. So if this is a responsibility of not just the state legislature, but the city as well, and I'm very disappointed that you folks have not undertaken ways to look at or coming up with suggestion to the legislature to look at different avenues to close that gap between expenditure and revenue. And you can talk about all the other things you want, but the reality is you're about 3 years from hitting $1 billion expense that the HART is projecting. And for you to stand there and say, okay, we're just going to float $750 million in bond for 1 year, I don't think that's responsible. I think you need to take a more aggressive approach in closing that gap. So you provide more certainty to the project, and you provide an avenue to lessen the tax burden on citizens.
Yeah, and I think, we are looking at all options. And I think every option is on the table. But our preferred method is the GET.
Right.
It's the preferred
method. Just pretty much defer that decision to the legislature, which is fine. But you yourself and the council members have not done enough to look at ways to close that gap and look at ways to think whether that's responsible or not, because all that conversation about this bond rating impacting the city bond rating, that's true for HART. Just because GET is being used to finance rail doesn't mean it's responsible to float a $700 million bond in 1 year. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it's very expensive, but I believe the financing plan is to try to pay it back as fast as possible, even with the GET, right?
And then, the additional burden of the failure of the city and the council to close the gap is that you have to go back to the council every year to ask for a between $350 million bond float to $750 million bond float. And so that creates even more uncertainty. So, the scenarios that we have looked at, the legislature has looked at to reduce the uncertainty for you, for your project, I just feel that you folks have not done enough and has not been aggressive enough to look at various approaches as you continue to allude.
Well, we're certainly open. Like I said, that,
Well, the time for openness is too late. I mean,
well, I think that
you yourself have said that, we're approaching what is that, another deadline, but, in essence, I mean, the time for that is too late. I mean, you folks should have come 2 years ago or, 2.5 years ago or even last session to look at various options. I mean, it's fine if you're open, but it's no longer your decision. It's our decision to figure this thing out for you. And I just don't know why reasonable, intelligent people cannot figure this thing out. I mean, what you need is more money and front loading right away to close the gap between your expenses and revenues so that we can save tax dollars in the long run. I just don't know why you don't get it.
I think, we do understand it, but like I said, we've looked at the options and we felt that, financing the project, although costly in financing, it will help with our cash flow problem, issues with all our other outstanding, ERS and other bills that we need to pay, that if we had the cash, yes, it would be best. But like I said, we are, looking at all the options and we're open. Our preferred method, again, is the GET. It's already set up. We're asking for a 10-year extension. Of course, like you said, the financing is more, but it's already proven. There's no legal challenges to it. And I think, for the council and the admin, I think, that's one of the concerns that we did have, looking at all the options.
Okay. The other thing is the 10-year extension. We asked our budget and finance to take a look at the 10-year extension and what it would be to close that gap. And they said it wouldn't be 10-year extension because 10-year extension would leave a significant surplus to the city and county of Honolulu. And it would be more along the lines of a 6-year extension. And it's because of the way you skew your payment amount in debt service. So as opposed to paying for your incurred debt right away, you delay it for 5 years and you pay interest and not principal. And because of that, you're able to skew that number, which in actuality should be 6 years as opposed to 10 years. So again, I caution you folks that, you continuously come to the legislature and ask for us to give you the authority to assess tax dollars for the rail project, but we don't like to be in a position where we have to check your facts and recheck your facts and find out it could be skewed in different ways that give us a clearer picture as opposed to what you folks have given. So I think I hope you understand that's why we continue to have a lack of trust and lack of credibility issue with you folks, because even the 10-year extension is debunked by our own state budget and finance.
With the 10 years, I think, we did bring that to your attention that, we also agreed with you that there would be a surplus during the session.
Now.
And we did.
Maybe you should tell your boss.
Well, I think that, the cities, looked at it and said that we were looking at some trigger language
Maybe what you folks need to do is be more honest with the public and honest with the legislature that the 10-year extension will yield a significant amount of surplus and what that surplus is, and have an answer for that surplus, as opposed to coming and telling the legislature the 10-year is exactly what we're going to need to close that gap.
I think, it's like looking at projections out in 2027 to 2037. And I think, cutting it to the exact dollar of 6 or 7 years is, kind of a mistake. I think if we went with the 10 with some kind of trigger to, if there was a surplus, they would reduce the years and the out years, I think would be the best way to do it, and not try to predict that this would happen 20 years from now.
Well, based on the spending patterns of HART and the city in the past, I don't think we can really trust the city to say, okay, if we have a surplus, somehow it will be returned to the taxpayers, or, you know, we'll do something good with the amount. I think what the public deserves is an amount that is accurate, and that goes along the lines of exactly why there should be different type of tax revenues or funding mechanism, because relying on one mechanism is volatile, regardless of whether it's GET, TAT, property tax, or any other kind of fees or taxes. If you have two or more sources, then, you know, I mean, it's like the stock market. You're not going to throw all your money in one stock. You're going to spread it out to make sure that it's less volatile. So that's the reason behind looking at different other tax revenues as opposed to GET, because GET, as you just admitted, is not reliable.
No, I think the GET is a big, broader base tax. When you look at the TAT, a 1%, Oahu or statewide might be between 25 and then $50 million, where the GET will probably be in a $300 to $400 million amount. So, you know, when you look at the base, it's not just based on tourists. You know, it's a lot of broader base type of tax that we feel is more stable than, you know, looking at one segment, which is the tourism industry and TAT.
But it's not GET or TAT. It's a combination of GET and TAT.
That's correct.
So would you rather have an assortment of tax revenues as opposed to relying on one tax source?
And so, like I said, you know, we are, you know, open to options. Our preferred method is the GET. However, if, you know, the legislature comes up with other options, you know, we will be looking at, you know, seeing the multitude of funding sources that you guys have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, as I said, it should be also your responsibility to look at those options as opposed to just the legislature. And, you know, you folks have failed to do that, other than continue to request either permanent GET, 30-year GET, 20-year GET, and now 10-year GET, but which even that you have just admitted it will yield a significant surplus to the city. Okay, thank you.
House members, any other questions? Rep. Hashem.
I don't know if you mentioned that you looked at you're open to anything. Has extending the project deadline, let's say 5 years, been floated? Because it's a cash flow issue, right? You mentioned if you could pay it out of pocket. That's how the originally rail was set up to do, with short-term debt and paid as you go, and there's no long-term debt. Has anybody floated the idea of extending the project for 5 years to lower that construction curve so we could pay it out of pocket?
I haven't, you know, looked at it, but maybe Hart, you know, when Hart comes up, they can address that. I think they would have issues with the FTA and the agreement, the full funding grant agreement. Maybe Hart can address that.
Well, I view this as similar to Boston's Big Dig, which they extended their project 8 years, and it was funded by FTA, and they had federal funds tied to their transit project also. So it's not unprecedented that projects don't come on, extension of the project, the deadline date. So
okay,
I guess I'll save that question for Hart.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Senator Dela Cruz, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I guess, Gary, you know, the comment about we're all one people, your people are our people. You know, the state is going to have to deal with building a new prison. That's estimated at $600 million. You're looking at Blaisdell. The topic of the Aloha Stadium has come up. That's what, $350 million. We still got to deal with facilities at West Oahu, Manoa, Community College, DOE schools throughout the whole state, affordable housing, and state hospitals, which are mainly on the neighbor island. And so when you're I guess talking from your perspective of what's best for rail, I guess this body has to look at what's best for the whole state. And by tying up the $2 extra billion in one source of revenue, when we could be using that $2 billion for other projects that are needed, is somewhat selfish. So I really do hope that you go back and figure out how you can be more flexible so that the state can try to address its needs with our capital improvement projects. The reality is we're still $7 billion short for pension liability, and we're still $9 billion short for our health benefits. So by tying up the GET, and we have all these liabilities of pension, health care, and all these CIP projects, it's going to make it difficult for us to deliver those services, and we're going to have to start cutting or raising taxes as well. By us dedicating the 0.5% only to rail, I'm not sure how we're going to start looking at funding these projects. So hopefully you can go back and look at your options and how we can address your needs, but at the same time address ours.
Yes, Senator, fully understand your concerns, and the city faces similar, funding issues, right? And we fully understand what the state is also looking at.
No, I don't think you do, because if you did, you wouldn't be coming asking for the extra $2 billion.
Any further questions from the Senate? Otherwise, we're going to be moving along with the next phase of this hearing. Prior to Hart, may we call a testimonies from Outrigger Enterprises is because of a prior commitment. They're kind of late already, so we'll allow Outrigger, and I believe it's Ed Case.
Chair, committee members, good morning. Actually, good afternoon at this point.
Good afternoon.
Wishful thinking. Aloha. Ed Case representing Outrigger Hotels Hawaii. We are a 70-year-old company. I speak here for 4,000 Outrigger employees on all 4 counties and beyond Hawaii, 36 properties, but I also speak for a much broader industry, an industry that accounts for somewhere in the range of 25 to 40% of our total economy, 200,000 some odd jobs, and a number of, obviously, major partners that are associated with us. So this is a multiplier effect economy. You obviously have my written testimony, and I won't dwell on that. I want to summarize, and I want to summarize by saying Outrigger, both the company Outrigger and as a member of Hawaii's hotel industry, strongly opposes any increase in the TAT for any reason, including the rail financing. I want to try to summarize my arguments in favor of no TAT increase briefly. First of all, in the last 5 years, you have already implemented the largest tax increase on the industry and probably any industry in Hawaii's history, I would guess. We have seen our TAT increased by 10% per year for 5 years. We have seen our real property tax taxes increase by 10% per year for 5 years. We have also, of course, paid the GET. If you want to try to figure out how much of the GET the tourism industry already pays separately, we are probably paying in the range of 1/3 of the total TAT. That is also increased. And so we have seen our taxes increase directly on the industry to about $1 billion a year in real property taxes and TAT, not to mention the GET. That is a huge burden that the visitor industry is bearing. You've done this without any direct assistance back to the industry. We have seen our TAT revenues back to the counties capped. We have seen the revenues to HTA capped. And we have seen convention center revenues capped. We have seen the general fund portion of the TAT increase from about 8% 10 years ago to well over 50% now, almost 60%. So in other words, you have increased our taxes substantially, but it has not directly gone back to the industry. It has been already a contribution to the needs of the state and the counties. We believe that increasing the TAT would materially harm our industry. visitors can and will go elsewhere. And because they haven't done so thus far, doesn't mean they won't tomorrow. We already see signs of slowing in the economy. These are being projected by both state and private projections by economies and otherwise. And I think it's worth noting that when we talk about the industry, we're not just talking about owners of this industry. We're not just talking about visitors. We are talking about employees. We are talking about constituents. We are talking about people that live and work here. And again, we're talking about partners of the industry itself, restaurants, bus companies, all the way down the line. The revenue increases that we have seen that are in the paper all the time and give you the impression that somehow this industry is doing gangbusters and nothing can really faze it, have all gone to cost increases, because we have seen our costs increase over the last 5 years. The costs of employment have increased. The cost of construction, 10% plus a year. Maybe that's why we don't see as much renovation in the industry going on. Marketing, goods, services, and of course taxes. Those cost increases have been necessitated by various situations, but they have been paid for by the revenue increase. This is not as if somebody is all of a sudden getting super rich off of the visitor industry. This is about maintaining an industry. We believe, in all honesty and with all sincerity and with all frankness, that we are being unfairly targeted for the costs of the rail. Why are you considering increasing the TAT, the tourism industry, the visitor industry? Is there some sense that we are not already paying our fair share? Because we feel we're paying more than our fair share. Is there some sense that perhaps the visitor industry makes more use of rail than somebody else? I don't think that that can be justified under any argument. Why not a special tax on any other industry, whether it be the construction industry, whether it be the healthcare industry, whether it be the banking industry? What is the reason, the policy reason, for taxing the tourism industry more to finance the cost of rail? We believe that some of the testimony already has been elicited this morning and this afternoon, that there are many ways in which you can, in fact, increase the revenues from the visitor industry by tightening up. For example, we have stood before you for a couple of sessions now and said, stop the bleeding of hundreds of millions of dollars of tax revenues to the alternative visitor industry. That has not been addressed. That would be one way that you could certainly see more revenues from the tourism industry, which we would support without actually raising the TAT. We also believe that the TAT, has been discussed already, is highly unpredictable, is highly volatile. And look back over the history of the TAT to see the evidence of how quickly it can change on the whims of economics internationally and other events. The fact that the TAT has been stable and has been increasing for the last 4 or 5 years is not, as they say in the stock market, a predictor of future success. That is not guaranteed. And I would certainly stand here and say to the Federal Transit Administration, if they're listening, and apparently they will be listening, to stress test the TAT if that's where you go on this, I would certainly say to them, do not depend on this continuation of revenues from the TAT continuing over time if what you're trying to do is provide a very specific means of financing. It is a volatile tax, and it can go away in a second. So in the big picture, our visitor industry and our 200,000 jobs oppose any increase in the TAT, and we do not understand why the industry itself, through the TAT, is being considered. We really think that over the last couple of years, as you have taken a look at various actions with the visitor industry, especially with the TAT, that you have played in some ways some Russian roulette with the industry. We've been lucky, but this is an industry that can be hurt, will be hurt again sometime in the future. And just because we've gotten away with it this long doesn't mean it's going to continue. We believe that our tourists are paying enough for the privilege of visiting Hawaii. And that is not a privilege. That is a choice. I think sometimes the need for financing leads one to the conclusion or to the statement said privately, sometimes publicly, well, they're just visitors. They can pay the tax. Let's not tax our local people. You know what? Tourists can vote. They do vote. They vote with their feet. They vote by clicking in 2 seconds on an online website when they decide not to come to Hawaii. And again, I would make the point that this is not solely about who comes to visit us. This is about actual people that live here, that work here. And when we increase this tax, we hurt them. So we think that the GET is far better. If you're going to have to do this, then you're going to have to do this. But we think the GET is a far broader based tax. We think it is stable, more stable over time. It is more predictable over time. The industry does pay its fair share of the GET. And Chair Luke, to your comment, we believe that in this case, no. Two streams of income are not the wise choice going forward. Perhaps if these two taxes were completely non-interdependent, we might make that case. Perhaps if there wasn't such a direct impact to the tourism industry, our number one industry, from raising the GET, which we believe will not be offset by any stability in the GET over time, maybe you could make that argument. But we don't agree that there is a policy reason for 2, 3, 4 streams of income here. We think put your marbles into the GET over the long run, make it strong, try to let the tourism industry produce for the GET. The tourism industry produces revenue for the GET. So in conclusion, we suggest that you not go with the TAT increase. We suggest again that you crack down on erosion and bleeding from the tourism industry of revenues that you can easily recapture by a little bit of focus. We think that you should lift caps on the TAT that have been imposed on the industry and on the counties, and we appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, members? Okay. Senator, Chair Dela Cruz.
Thank you. Does Outrigger charge a resort fee?
Pardon?
Does Outrigger charge a resort fee?
Yes, Outrigger charges a resort fee, as do others.
I guess I'm not quite sure. I never really bought into the idea that the sky is falling for tourism, because if that were the case, why are hotels charging resort fees? Why is KSL Capital investing in Hawaii? I think the tourism is our biggest industry, and that's our source of revenue. If that's a source of revenue and that's what the body believes is the right course of action to take, then everyone has to do what they can do because they can help provide the revenue for what our needs are. I can see your point, but if it was really suffering, you would cut your resort fees. We wouldn't have these investments. So I'm not quite sure what sources you have in regards to showing the opposite.
Okay, well, I think you've made a couple of points there, so I'll try to tick them off. First of all...
No, I don't need an answer.
Okay.
Well, with respect, Chair, I think that is... I won't answer if you don't want me to answer, but I don't think that extends to me the courtesy of responding.
If you can provide your sources, then we'd like to review.
Thank you. Senator Kim.
Thank you. I want to follow up on the resort fee. How much is the resort fee that Outrigger charges?
It depends on which hotel you're with. Some charge more than others.
About $25?
Less for Outrigger, as a matter of fact.
It is 25.
I think so. I think it depends on the property. Some are 12, 13, some are 20, as I recall.
When did you folks first start charging a resort fee?
Well, again, it depends on which company.
Well, give me one. Honolulu.
Honolulu? Well, I believe Honolulu started charging them maybe 5-7 years ago. Outrigger started charging them about a year ago.
Okay. So did you consider that people might not come if you put on a $25 resort fee?
Excuse me. We did have a debate within Outrigger over whether if we implemented a resort fee, we would lose business. Okay. And so, yes, that is a consideration. From the visitor's perspective, it's the total bill that they are charged. It is, and when you charge a resort fee, that doesn't mean it's over and above a room fee. It's not net right up, so it's a direct addition. You're trying to not provide for a room fee that is so high that people don't come. So it's a total amount, and it's very,
So why do you put it on as a resort fee and not part of your hotel room fee?
it's a very difficult competitive difference there where you are basically dealing with other people who are advertising a rate without fully disclosing a resort fee. And so you are dealing there with a situation where your costs are the same, but you're being eaten alive by a marketing effort by others not to disclose it. So you are all led, and everybody has been led to the same place. There are hardly any companies that don't charge a resort fee anymore. But the bottom line is that what you have to do is you have to say, this is our total amount, and part of this is a resort fee.
But isn't the bottom line that people look at is the hotel room rate and not necessarily the tax, not necessarily the sales tax or the TAT or the resort fee?
That is not true. I think they look at the components increasingly nowadays.
Well, I mean, I'm a traveler, and I know people, and we look at that rate. Even in the airline, you look at it, and then at the end, you go, oh my God, all that in taxes. So basically, it's that fee. And so I understand the volatility. And when was the last time, or any time, that the industry supported a TAT?
I don't think the industry generally does support a TAT for
They've never supported the TAT, correct?
Well, that's not entirely true, as a matter of fact. I believe that we supported the TAT before my time when I was over on that side rather than this side.
When was that?
I believe when the convention center came into existence, we supported the original TAT.
No, I remember you guys didn't support it. And
Well,
I remember telling, because I was here, I remember telling the industry, if you don't support the TAT now, you're not going to get a portion of it. And they fought it and fought it and fought it, and it was passed. And that's the reason why the industry in the beginning didn't get anything from the TAT, because the industry failed to support it. And all along the way, it was always the same excuse and the same thing, that we're going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Kill the goose that lays a golden egg. And time again, we've seen that. And yet, it hasn't stopped the industry from, one, putting in a resort fee, or two, every time you raise your hotel rates. You constantly raise your hotel rates.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what point you're making.
Well, the point I'm making is, if it's so volatile that we're going to raise it by the TAT by 1%, when you raise your hotel rooms greater than 1%, I mean, you continually do that, you raise your resort fee, and if you're looking at the GET, 0.5% GET on your one hotel room night versus a 1% increase in the TAT on your room night, I mean, it's like, what are we talking about?
Well, what we're talking about is competition in the world. We're exactly talking about competition in the world. We're talking about if we have
in your hotel room rates, in your resort
Yes,
fee,
we are,
which is a
absolutely.
much greater amount than a 1% increase in the TAT. And many, many places that I travel to, the TAT is 15%.
Yes, that's true. And those destinations are having a problem maintaining it as well. And some of those destinations, if you're talking about places like New York, which always gets brought up, are very, very unique destinations where they can, in fact, impose that. We function in a different world. We function in a world of great competition around the world right now in our resort component.
Thank you.
So what we are, again, we can get down into the weeds on the individual elements of how much the visitor is charged, whether it is a room rate, whether it is a resort fee, whether it is a GET, whether it is a TAT. But if you charge that visitor too much at the end of the day, that visitor will not come. And then you will not have your TAT or your GET for that matter. The fact that we have had a lucky streak for a number of years now does not mean it's going to continue. It does not mean that.
Thank you. I've been here for 35 years. I've heard the same argument year after year. I've heard that, we're going to kill our industry. And I've been the tourism chair, and I've supported protecting the TAT. And so, some of these arguments that you're putting on to me is just not, doesn't hold water.
Fair
So,
enough. Well,
thank you.
I would hope you would consider my other 6 arguments then.
Okay. Yeah. Any more questions from the Senate? Okay. Then the House.
Okay, House members, any questions?
Chair.
Okay, Rep. Ward.
Thank you, Chair.
Followed by Rep. Holt.
Thank you for your honest opinion of how Waikiki needs a little bit of a renovation. A lot of our Asian visitors sometimes say what they see, and it's rather embarrassing. So that puts a little bit of credibility into what you're saying, that it's not all that much profit. And by the way, it was a regret that you were the last local-owned hotel group. Or let's say that Kelly and others were
The last major one, but there are other local small-owned hotel companies, yes.
But my question is, you and others, particularly the mayor, I think, started this years ago, that, hey, the tourists pay 1/3 of the GET. Is that empirically accurate and proven that it is 1/3, or it just became sort of, as it got repeated, it got believed, and no one has ever cut it down? Is it actually 1/3?
There was, I believe there was a study maybe 10 years ago. Somebody else might know the details of that study that put it in roughly that range. I think it was Leroy Laney, as a matter of fact, for First Hawaiian. But from my perspective, the way you can get there fairly easily is if you just simply assume that tourism is in fact 1/3 of our economy, which I think nobody would really disagree with. And that's economic activity that's going on. We're buying and selling just like anybody else. In fact, the argument is that we're buying and selling more than a lot of other people because we get taxed on everything we do. And so I think that's about 1/3.
I was buttonholed earlier by one of the audience that, hey, it's only 14%. Look at the numbers. And I didn't know if there was anybody who's a number cruncher who's here, like the Tax Foundation, et cetera, who would say that it's not 1/3. But yeah, intuitively, it does seem to be correct. Otherwise, if we're going to do a bill based upon an accurate assessment, we need to have really pretty solid facts. So thank you, Mr. Case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any other House members with questions? Okay. Chair Luke.
It's good to hear that, at least Outrigger is willing to work with the legislature in trying to collect taxes from Airbnb and other bed and breakfast organization. And, it is, because, it has been the visitor industry that has continued to try to put roadblocks in the state's attempt to collect those taxes. So I would hope that next legislative session, when we deal with the issue again, that Outrigger and the other members of the visitor industry would be more open to some of the issues put forward in collecting taxes from Airbnb.
Chair Luke, that shocks me that you would say that. Outrigger and the industry have been very, very supportive of the legislature's efforts.
Under your own terms. Because the legislature had various proposals, and I believe that the visitor industry was one of those organizations that requested the veto from the governor, which got vetoed 2 years ago, and because of that, last year, because we couldn't come to an agreement with the administration, we decided to leave it for another day. But, hopefully you folks will be more open to working with the legislature as opposed to having it under your terms.
Well, first of all, let me state categorically for Outrigger, and I believe for the industry, we support you taxing and regulating the alternative visitor industry on exactly the same terms that is applied to the rest of us. So that's where
we differ, because it is very different, but that can be set aside for a discussion in another day. But, I just find it a little bit disingenuous that you come and say, okay, you folks should find ways to raise taxes on Airbnb and other platforms, when it was the visitor industry that has fought hard to veto our efforts 2 years ago.
Well, the reason for that, Chair Luke, I can't let that go unaddressed. The reason for that particular bill that we opposed was because the basic deal that Airbnb offered the legislature was, let us collect the taxes and let us regulate these alternative visitor industries. So in other words, don't worry about whether they're legal or not. Don't worry about whether they're paying their taxes or not. We'll just be your tax collector, and we will give you the money. And you know what? We felt that you guys were being completely shortchanged by that approach, that you were leaving millions and tens and hundreds of $millions on the table because you were going to basically turn over the enforcement mechanisms, regulation and taxation for the alternative visitor industry to Airbnb, and you're going to get 10 cents on the dollar for that.
Well, you know, that is your analysis, but Department of Taxation had their own analysis, and, you know, the Department of Taxation was very confident in the agreement that was reached. So, you know, my point is, you know, I mean, you're coming to this House and the Senate to say, okay, you know, I mean, tax it the other way. I'm making a point that we have been trying to tax the other ways, but, you know, you folks have put major roadblocks. So I'm hoping that in the future legislative session, you'll be more open to working with us as opposed to putting us in a position where you think you know better than our state departments and various legislators who have tried to tax and tried to regulate bed and breakfast and the taxes that should be owed to the state of Hawaii, and it cannot be just on your terms.
Well, I understand your perspective, and I respectfully disagree with you. That has not been on our terms. We have advocated, we have said what we were concerned about, and we actually have testified that we'd be willing to work with the Department of Taxation and everybody else to get those terms correct. But we regard the effort not to have full taxation and full regulation. No fascist USA!
Kahili, and that would be your last question.
Hi, Mr. Case.
Or the last question.
There was a question brought up about resort fees. Does the state of Hawaii charge general excise tax on those resort fees?
No. I believe the answer is no. I'm sorry.
On the resort fees. Do we charge GET on this island 4.5% on that resort charge?
I should know the answer. I'm blanking on it right now. I think that has been certainly a matter of discussion, but I don't know how it's specifically been resolved.
Okay. So we've been collecting a TET since January 1st, 1987. 30 years now. Started off at 5%. Today it's 9.25%. Back in 1987, there was a study done at the university that said there was no impact to the lodging industry with that 5% increase. Has the industry, or has there been industry studies since that 1987 report on the increase in TAT as it's increased through the years?
I'm sorry, I got distracted by trying to get the answer, which is yes, we charge the GET on the resort fee.
So we do charge the GET on this island and on the neighbor islands. I guess they're 4% respective.
I assume so, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're subject to the same rules. So.
Okay, thank you.
And then you were asking, has the industry ever calculated what the impact is of the TAT?
Since 1987, when the UH did that study that said that there was no impact at 5%. You know, we've seen TAT go down four times in the last 30 years. The early 90s during the Japanese bubble, that was one. 2009 during the recession, that was another one. And so we're looking at forecasting, right? Because the bottom line in this discussion, it comes down, what are the GE forecast revenues for the next 10 to 15 years, and what are the TAT forecast revenues for the next 10 to 15 years? So we're trying to forecast that number. And my question is, you know, we've talked about it being potentially a volatile tax. Has the industry looked at what it has done in the past and what it could do in the future if we increase it to 10.25%, coupled with the 4.5% we're already paying in GE, which is about a 15% tax on our tourists that stay in our hotels, at least on this island?
You know, there has not been a specific study that I'm aware of that looks at, well, if you actually do continue the GET and increase the TAT to the levels that evidently you're considering, what will be the specific impact on the industry? I don't know of a study that actually asks that question or answers that. First of all, the proposal is about, what, 2 months old or something like that. So we're all kind of reacting to a new proposal here. I would say this. First of all, this industry feels it is being squeezed on the revenue side and on the expense side. Now, again, to Senator Kim's point, sometimes it doesn't look that way from a public perspective, but I can tell you that inside the industry, that is the discussion that occurs, is how can we actually continue these operations, continue this expansion, continue investments in employees, in infrastructure, in sales and marketing, preserve our position in the world during a time of incredible competition when visitors are much more discerning, and I think that it is actually the rare visitor nowadays that that does not look at the individual components of what they are being charged. How do we actually maintain our position? And so for us to sit there and look at rising costs short of the TAT and then to be faced with a 1% increase in the TAT is of great concern to this industry. The other thing to point out in this regard is that, unfortunately, many of the issues that we are discussing with you right now are not within any of our control. The legislature cannot snap its fingers and have the tourism industry, be hurt or helped. It can certainly do some things either way, but the things that we worry about are national economies, international economies. Will the stock market crater and make people fearful of traveling? Will the Japan economy slow down again? Will there be a disruption somewhere in the world that causes people not to visit here? This is an industry and is a tax that is highly susceptible to forces beyond our control. The GET is much more modulated in that way because it covers everybody. So it is diversified, to Chair Luke's point. It is inherently diversified. With the TAT, you're only going after one industry. Yes, it's a huge industry. When it's doing well, the TAT revenues go up by hundreds of millions of dollars a year over 5 years, and you're using all of that money. But when they go down, you don't have that money. So does that mean that the city's going to come back here and ask for that money when the TAT dries up on your FTA calculations over 10 years? Absolutely it does. And so that's an important consideration, and that's what worries us about this. I would make the point again, though, that aside from the discussion that we've had over, whether the industry is, charging too much or too little and what impact that is on the visitor, we have a fundamental question about fairness here. Why is this industry being targeted for this purpose? Why? I haven't heard a good policy reason. I haven't heard one yet.
I totally agree with you. I have those same concerns when you're looking at instability in North Korea and the threats on Hawaii and all that rhetoric of how that could affect our tourist industry. And I share those same concerns as well. One last analytical question. Outrigger has hotels throughout the state?
Yes.
So on the outer islands, when they collect that TAT, and Outrigger reports that TAT, are they reporting it as TAT generated because Outrigger's base is here on Oahu, or is that proportionally allocated to what is generated on the other 3 counties?
You're talking about the TAT?
Yes, sir.
Not the GET, right?
TAT.
Okay, TAT, I think we report that in bulk. I don't think we actually report it by county, although we can calculate it internally by county. The GET is a different story because then we have to get into an allocation to the specific county as to where the GET is sourced, because the rate is different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chair Dela Cruz.
Thank you. Mr. Case, are you familiar with Dr. Pham?
Who?
Dr. Pham with Council of Revenues.
Dr. Pham?
Pham.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I guess his communication with our office stated that the TAT is inelastic, so that despite the increase in the TAT, it won't affect the visitor arrivals. Aren't you a member of Council of Revenues?
Yes, I am, and that's why I was wondering whether Dr. Pham was speaking for the council, because to my knowledge, he's not.
Okay, well, it was sent to me, and it was also copied by the chair of the Council of Revenues was also copied. So hopefully you can have this discussion at the next meeting. Also, UHERO did a report last month. I'm sorry. UHERO report, how Hawaii state government shares TAT revenues with its local governments. So you might want to take a look at those sources to see how they compare with your information.
Right, and again, I would say this. I mean, you know, there's a couple of different ways of looking at all of these things. There is a highly economic-based scholarly study, which has great credibility, and then there is being inside the industry, which I hope has equal, if not more, credibility. I'm relaying to you right now what our concerns are for the state's #1 industry, and I'm relaying to you that we, first of all, I speak for the industry. We completely disagree with any argument that the TAT is inelastic. The problem with the TAT is that you don't always know it's impacting you as it's actually happening. There is a breaking point. There is a tipping point. There is a point at which people say, well, why should I go to Hawaii anymore? I can go, you know, I can go to the Gold Coast. I can go any number of places in the world. So, you know, what concerns us is that the appearance over time of health in the industry is taken as a predictor that things are going to stay the same and that there's nothing really that we can do to harm the industry. And we think completely the opposite. We think there's plenty that is being done to harm the industry and that this would be one more piece of that.
Okay, and I guess the question of why do you feel you are taking on this burden? I guess that's the same question probably our poorest citizens who have to pay the GET are asking as well. So we're going to have to figure out some combination so that we can help the city with its project.
We're there with you. We're going to pay the GET. We're going to pay a lot of GET here. We're going to pay this one way or the other, you know. And again, I want to make the point, you know, although sometimes I hear people saying, well, let's just tag the visitors with it, they can afford it. First of all, they can go somewhere else. And second, these are citizens that you are talking about. These are hundreds of thousands of employees, and they are directly or indirectly going to be paying this TAT, because if revenues are constrained by increasing costs, that comes back to haunt everybody. So that's why we say that a GET that spreads that consequence, that risk, that benefit over the broadest number of people is the fairest way to do this. I could make the same argument for any one of our other industries.
I guess what I just go back to is what I don't understand. Then if the industry feels like that, why do we have resort fees?
You know, I don't know. You know, resort fees is always something that gets tossed in the industry's face when we have these discussions. It's been happening for a long time now. The resort fees are a component of what the industry is trying to do to allocate between the straight costs of operating a hotel and the extras, no different from the airline industry. It's highly controversial. As I testified earlier, Outrigger fought against the resort fees internally for a long, long time, and we came to the conclusion that we could not compete. We could not compete with our competitors in Hawaii if we did not go in that same direction, and that's no different than what everybody else virtually has had to do here in Hawaii. It's, again, the total amount broken down by base rent, resort fees, TAT. That's what the visitor is looking at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can I ask that Outrigger do a reporting on your 10-year room rates increases the last 10 years and send it to the chairs, please? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, hearing none, we will proceed with Hart. After Hart, then HTA, and we'll be allowing all those in the rest of the hotel industry, the construction industries. But if you're not here, we would suggest that if you're here to testify after HTA, to kind of line up so we can move along the testifies, because we don't know who's actually here to speak on the industry portion. On the individuals, it'll be another story. So we will call you then as we end with the larger industries. So Hart, please, as well as whoever. We were going to ask if you were going to do a PowerPoint. Now, is this PowerPoint for all of your speakers or just one time?
Just three of us.
You have 3 speakers and 3 PowerPoints. Okay. Just what? Just one PowerPoint. Okay. And who, Ms. Murphy, who is going to start? Okay, Murphy. Can we have the lights down, please? Lights. Okay. Okay, you can proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, chairs of all the committees and the members of the committee. My name is Krishnaya Murthy, and I am the interim CEO and the executive director at HART. We thank you for the opportunity you have given us today to testify. HART appreciate efforts that have gone into the preparation of some of the slides that we saw through the media, and we appreciate all the information that you have collected on behalf of HART. HART supports the intent of funding action considered by the legislature to provide sufficient funding to deliver the project defined in the FFGA, which is the 20 miles, 21 stations, fully automated rail system. There has been a lot of concerns expressed, rightfully so, regarding the cost of the project and the schedule. The current estimated cost to complete the project remains to be $8.165 billion, or as the mayor rounds it to $8.2 billion without finance cost, and has remained so since September of 2016. It has not changed. Yes, there have been different dollar numbers talked about, but they're all due to different funding options and different splits in the allocation of the GET funds. The increase in the cost of the project from December 2012, when the FFGA was signed, has gone up by $3.2 billion. Yes, it is a matter of big concern. We can account for that increase, and the increase happened due to award of contracts prematurely prior to establishing the project definition, selection of technology, establishing proper establishment of project definition, and awarding contracts without defined scope of work, environmental challenges and delays, and normally without third-party agreements, which are normally done way ahead before awarding any contracts, and unprecedented construction and escalation costs contributed to some of these cost increases. The increase can be broken down into 9 areas. I want to be specific as to where this increase is coming from. In the area of design and construction, the cost increased by $1 billion and $50 million. Soft costs, which is the consultants and staff costs, it increased by $424 million. Core systems and core systems oversight went up by $345 million. Utilities has gone up by $255 million. Real estate by $39 million. Owner-controlled insurance program increased by $89 million. Legal costs went up by $20 million. And the allocation of total contingency increased by $422 million. So those are the things that contributed to the increase in the cost of the project. Now let me give you a brief update on the rail transit system update. Major contracts at the present percentage of completion is West Oahu-Farrington Highway Guideway is 99.3%. Kamehameha Highway Guideway is 96.3%. Maintenance and storage facilities 100% complete. Core systems is at 42.4%. Airport selection and guideway and station groups are 7.2%. We have not awarded any contract for the city center guideway and stations or the Pearl Island Station Transit Center and the garage. Over $4.41 billion of contracts have either been awarded or under construction as of June 30, 2017, which includes the 15.9 of the 20.1 miles of guideway and 13 of the 21 stations. Core systems contractor Ansaldo joint venture has completed the base design development and is well into manufacturing and testing of all the other subsystems. Train number 1, which is the 4-car consist, was delivered in March 2016, and the first 2 cars of train number 2 was delivered in 2017. Next slide, please. We have taken many steps to control cost and make the project accountable and transparent, and some of the things that we have done are proactive steps that we have taken to evaluate all the consultant scopes, their performances, qualifications of their people employed on the project, and technical competencies of those people who are on the project, as well as systematically evaluate the soft costs in all program areas. We have implemented a contract change committee for all contract changes, over $500,000, that provides management review of changes from a programmatic perspective, basically looking into every aspect of the change, how did it originate, where the mistake came from, who is paying for the cost, what is it coming from the allocated contingency? Those are the questions the committees ask to make sure that proper accountability is there. All change orders greater than $1 million are subject to review by the HART Board's Finance Committee and approval of the HART Board of Directors. Next slide, please. We are committed to complete this project within the forecasted budget and schedule. One item I would like to point out, though, is the current schedule clearly states the city center guideway and stations and the Pearl Island Station and garage and the transit center needs to be awarded by August of 2018. Any delays to that particular contract may have an influence on the cost and schedule of the project. We are definitely dependent on the state and city decision regarding the funding. HART supports the funding actions that the legislature and the city takes to deliver the whole project, and we are committed to deliver this project to forecasted budget and schedule. With that, I'm going to ask Mr. Sam Carnaggio to talk about Federal Transit Administration, and they are our partners, and they, being a partner, they have some checks and balances that they have established in the way we conduct ourselves and in the way we perform our work. So I want Sam Carnaggio to walk us through that. Thank you.
Aloha, committee chairs and members. My name is Sam Carnaggio, and I've been the project director for the HART Rail project for the past 2 years. I've been the liaison with FTA and their oversight contractor during that time. Today I've been asked to speak about FTA, probably because I am the former Director of Engineering for FTA. I assure you that FTA wants this project to be successful, and they are doing all that they can in both their support and in their patience. On the other hand, they have an oversight obligation to ensure that their $1.55 billion investment is protected. In doing so, they will question and challenge our assumptions and projections, especially with regards to our determination of rates for escalation, inflation, and cost trends. They will question our sources and stress all of our projections, as you've heard, decreasing our revenues by as much as 10% and increasing our expenses by as much as 10%. Lastly, they will be mindful of the fact that they themselves will be scrutinized by the U.S. Department of Transportation and the administration's new FTA administrator. I've also been asked to speak about audits. As you may note, we have had essentially 4 audits over the past 2 years, which have addressed 4 different aspects of our project. All have been beneficial and all have contributed to improving our organization and our project. We have learned from them. The latest, the APTA peer review, helped with our technical capacity and our processes. Those recommendations are being incorporated now. The previous one was actually a U.S. DOT Inspector General review of the FTA, their oversight of their financial reviewers. We note it because the U.S. DOT actually reviewed HART's and other transit agencies' records. They actually visited here in January 2016 and spent some weeks with us. HART and specific events are referenced in the report, and we received feedback from that. The PMOC risk refresh in 2016 was a full project review that has been performed every 2 years since the project was awarded. It is a full and complete review of our project capabilities and processes. The last audit noted was the audit performed by the city auditor in 2016 and was more of a performance audit that covered all aspects of the HART as a business entity. Its purpose was to review the project to ensure economic, effective, and efficient practices. Next slide. Lastly, I was asked to identify our current status with regards to audits. HART is open to audits and will fully participate in any undertaking. It can only make us stronger. In fact, HART is currently undergoing a procurement systems review by FTA right now. HART has submitted their documents as requested, which FTA is reviewing, and the actual on-site audit takes place at the end of September. Additionally, HART has been notified that FTA will conduct their next FTA triennial review of the city in the spring of 2018. This review, which includes the city's Department of Transportation, DTS, is all-encompassing and covers 17 different areas as noted in the PowerPoint. Additionally, on an annual basis, there are financial reviews by an independent financial firm and a yearly FTA review of financial payments. Lastly, there are our monthly meetings and reports by HART and the FTA's project management oversight contractor, who has been overseeing the project for the last 10 years. All of these reports are public information and placed on the HART website. I thank you for your time and listening, and I will state that HART is appreciative of the time that the legislature has taken and invested in helping us resolve this dilemma. We know that the legislature has taken on a huge responsibility in doing this, and we are thankful that so many of you care enough to invest in this extremely important project. With that, Chair, I'd like to ask our CFO, Robert Yu, to come up.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Are you the last speaker?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
So I have 2 slides, and really the information on the 2 slides have probably been discussed the whole morning. So one of the things I want to point out in this revenue and expenses slide is what Chair Luke was referring to earlier, that there's a funding gap between the amount of revenue that we bring in and the expenditures through some of the years. So that's the funding gap that we're talking about that would require either financing or find additional sources of revenue to cover the expenditures. Okay, next slide. So this slide has to do with what our forecast, general excise tax surcharge, and how that compared to our collection. So we started forecasting GET in 2012 when we signed the full FFGA agreement, and at that time we used a growth rate of 5%, 5.04%, and it has since fluctuated from 5.04% to 4.3% just as recent as March 2016. So if you look at our forecasting line, you see a lot of ups and downs. And we just thought that, well, we need a better way to forecast GET revenue going forward. So, so the index that we're tying our GET forecast revenue on is the quarterly Council on Revenue GET growth rate that they make public. So using their projections, the growth rate for GET is between 3.2 to 3.9% between now and 2023. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, will you return to your seats for questioning, please?
Lorraine.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was nice, short and sweet, and you answered the questions that we sent you. So we appreciate that. Members, questions? Senator Kahili, followed by anyone else?
So my question is for Hart. Thank you for submitting testimony on Friday. I had a chance to look at that, and my question is in regards to the APTA team that had come in January, that had done a independent, I guess, audit or scope or overview of the overall project. And one of their really, really important things that they emphasize in there, amongst others, and you addressed some of those in the attachment you sent us, is an approved re-baseline program budget and schedule were quote-unquote desperately needed back in January and provided to the different teams. Has Hart approved the re-baseline program budget?
This is the, yes, we have submitted to the board the revised cost of $8.165 billion, and they have approved it. Yes.
And is the schedule still interim operations in 2021 with the full service date of December 31st, 2025? Is that still the schedule?
2025 is the schedule to complete all the way up to Ala Moana, and there is a what we call an intermediate schedule to operate up to Aloha Stadium if the city decides to do so, and that is in 2020.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Kim?
Thank you. Good afternoon. The FTA date, September 15th, they require the report, correct?
September 20.
September 15th is the date report that due for the funding.
This is the one that the FTA is asking for.
Correct. So what have Hart done to prepare for this, and are you ready with the report, or what's the status?
Well, the plan, recovery plan, has several portions of aspects to it. One is the management capacity of the organization, whether we are capable of delivering this project and do we have the capacity, and the other is the technical capacity of the organization. So we have done those, we have addressed those in the recovery plan. We have not completed the financial plan because we're still not sure the funding source and as to when it's coming and how it is coming. So we have left that portion. On September 15th, FTA is expecting not only finalize the rest of the reports of the financial plan, but give them a financial plan which shows how the rest of the project is going to be built, and is there a reliable, dedicated source of funding available to it? If not, what actions are there left open? So that's the report they're expecting on 15th.
Yeah, my question is, what kind of alternatives are you prepared to prevent that you don't get a 10-year extension from this body?
Well, we have provided, Robert, you want to talk the financial side of what we have done?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so with respect to the September 15th request by the FTA, we have put together models, and what we're really waiting on now is the sources of revenue that would accompany the financial plan, so that we could submit it to show how we're going to finance and pay for the project at the $8.165 billion cost. With respect to other options that we're looking at, in September of 2016, HART submitted an interim plan to the FTA, which talks about and discuss in pretty detail a number of options that HART is looking at if it doesn't go to Honolulu.
So that was a...
Actually, that was more than option A, B, C, and D. I don't know. I don't have the number of options. I could count them up.
Okay.
But anyway, the interim plan is on our website.
So I'm wondering, are you folks just waiting to fill in that PUCA to FTA with the legislature and what we decide? Are you putting all of your eggs in one basket that we're going to give you that extension?
I'm putting all my eggs in one basket from the standpoint that whether there'll be a GET extension or any other funding source, I'm just waiting for that information so I could complete the plan. From a project cost standpoint, the costs are projected out to 2025.
Okay, so
it's a matter of revenue.
So what's your plan if you don't get the 10-year extension from this body? What's your financial plan or source?
Well, a financial plan is not only dependent on the 10-year extension. So if you, for example, give us a 7-year extension, well, that's what we're going to look at. Maybe you'll give us a 7-year extension or 5-year extension plus other sources of revenue. So
okay.
I'm not waiting for just a 10-year extension.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. If we give you less than 10 years extension, anything less than that, what are your projected sources of revenue at this point?
If you give us less than 10 years of extension.
Yeah, say we give you
7
5
years.
years. Say we give you 5 years.
Okay.
What's your revenue source?
I think you can answer.
I think HART has no way of funding itself. We are dependent on the city and county of Honolulu.
I understand, but what you have to submit something to FTA. So I want to know, in this interim, what are you projecting? And you got to project that we may not give you that full amount. So what are some of the numbers you're prepping so you can get that report to them on time?
Well, at this time, based on everything that we know, well, because of the special session, we are projecting we are going to get the full funding to finish the job by 2025.
Okay, so you're telling me and this body that you're putting all of your eggs in one basket and that you are betting that we're going to give you 10 years and you don't have anything else planned. Right now, you don't have any numbers being crunched or any other sources that you're going to be able to send to FTA on September 15th.
I'm not being disingenuous. Well, as I said, we have no authority to either shorten the project or stop it anywhere in the middle of the project with the funding we have. That's an action to be taken by the city council.
Okay, but who's responsible for sending in the report?
Pardon me?
Who's responsible for sending in the September 15th report?
Hart is responsible.
Okay.
We work with the city in order to fill the financial.
Okay, so how are you going to send them anything if you're not doing anything now to project for funding sources in the event the legislature does not give you the 10-year extension? If we give you 5 years or we give you 1% TAT, what are you doing? Because you are responsible for the report, not the city council, not the mayor, but Hart.
We are working with the city BFS on that issue, and we don't have all the final information.
So
to
I'm
give you
asking,
at
what
this
are
time.
some of the thoughts on what your funding sources will be?
You want to answer?
Well, the truth is, we haven't considered any other city funding sources other than what's been discussed at the state level.
So you have 30 days for when this report is due, and you are betting that we're going to give you, you guys are so arrogant that you're thinking we're going to give you the whole amount, and you're not planning on any alternative in the event it doesn't happen.
Well, I don't think it's an issue of arrogance. From what I understand of the schedule is, if there's going to be a special session, it's from the 28th to the 1st. Whatever comes out of the special session, we will put that into the financial plan. If that's not adequate, then we will need to talk to the city and county about the updated financial.
So you're going to have 15 days or less than 15 days to talk to them. Why wouldn't you start talking to them ahead of time in the event that happens? I mean, that's the problem with the city and this project. You have been so one-track mind, you have not had any other alternatives, and you keep running against problems because you don't plan for any of these obstacles. That is not responsible planning. And I am very, very hesitant in giving you guys any more money because you guys have been so irresponsible. Thank you, Madam.
I have an answer for that.
Okay, further questions? Yes.
We understand your frustration. We are trying our best.
All right, we'll have Senator Wakai and followed by Senator Revere.
Thank you, Chair. What troubles me about this morning's discussion is that so much of our efforts are focused on the revenue side, and all of that revenue discussion is on the backs of the taxpayers of the state, whether it's the hotels or whether it's the GET. And in follow-up to Senator Kim's thoughts, Hart has shown very little creativity or innovation in trying to find other sources of revenue. I mean, this is the day of public-private partnership. And why Hart hasn't looked at other sources of revenue. For example, there's no leasable space from what I gather in any of these stations. How are you going to continue to pay for operations? I've seen no advertising plan as a revenue stream or option. Why not discuss naming rights? If Bank of Hawaii wants to go put its name on the downtown station, have them pay for part of the construction costs. Why do we give it to Ala Moana for free? If we're going to deliver 120,000 customers to a company's doorstep, why not pit Ala Moana against Walmart, against Walgreens, and figure out like some innovative way to bring in some private sector money to pay for this project? But you just mentioned, or your financial officer just mentioned, that you're really only relying on state and city taxpayer monies to fund this monstrosity. Can you tell us why you're not really embracing creative sources of revenue and bringing in private partnership into this discussion?
We are, you're absolutely right. We are actually looking into all of those issues that you just mentioned. In addition to that, we are looking at the city center guideway stations and Pearl Island Transit. Could it be a public-private financing part of it available? Can it be a public-private partnership with operations and maintenance? So those options are being looked at.
We're 10 years into the project. I don't understand why it's taken this long for the city and Hart to open its eyes to look at the opportunity of bringing in alternative money other than from taxpayers? And I know that you've been on the job for less than a year, so it's not a commentary on your leadership, but it's just baffling to me how we've gotten to this point, and at year 10 of collecting monies from the taxpayers have only now thought of bringing in some other partners into the discussion. You mentioned in your presentation about value engineering and lessons learned, and you talked about how you are going to be looking at contracts. Can you tell us, through all of these efforts, how much did you save the taxpayers of Hawaii by looking at these new forms of value engineering and contract reviews?
We are working on those. In fact, we had just hired a person with the value engineering experience of having done almost about 230 value engineerings in a career. So we have that individual on board, and we are looking at the airport guideway stations and the civic center station to see where we can cut costs in order to bring the project within the budget and schedule, or where we can save some funds.
Okay. One final question. I know we're looking at funding your system all the way to Ala Moana. Is there any chance that, as we build out these stations, that we just start running the train from Kapolei or Kroc Center to Aloha Stadium, if that's the first leg, and then as we build this thing out, then have the train run further and further into town. But for us to kind of sit here and wait for this entire project to be built out, and then at year 2025 to start running the train, to me seems like a lost opportunity.
We are definitely, our current schedule is to finish up to way to stadium by 2020, and then the city needs to make the decision to operate at that point. And then depending on their choice, they can operate it, or they can do an incremental operation, continue beyond Aloha Stadium. As we finish stations, they can start coming in towards the Ala Moana. That's a plan available to them to make that decision.
Do we do it earlier?
They need to work their fare structure and work it with the bus integration of bus and rail intermodal system. That's all being worked at this point.
To me, it would be a little bit more strategic, though, if you were starting it out, not just at the, I mean, if you can go from the Kroc Center to Pearl City for the next few years, why not start it then? I mean, why are you so fixated on these certain parameters? Why not, I mean, be creative about how you're going to roll this thing out, because I think a lot of us want to see the train be successful and want to see it move. It can move now, but you just have it sitting in a barn doing nothing. Couldn't it be taking some of our residents from the leeward side to another part of the leeward part of our island?
Certainly, it's an option we'll be looking at.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, thanks.
You're done. Senator Revere.
Thank you. Mr. Carnaggio, please. Thank you. I wanted to ask if you... Thanks, Mr. Murthy. Aloha. I wanted to ask, you have experience working with FTA, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So in all your time with FTA, has every single project come through and followed through on their full funding grant without any modifications, because that's what FTA demands every single time?
By modifications, you mean changes to the schedule?
Any changes to the schedule, changes to design, changes to live within budget? Surely there have been changes that FTA has approved along the way.
Of course there are. And the least impactful is schedule. They'll let schedule move out. Secondly is cost. If the cost increases, they're not going to pay any more money, but they allow the transit agency to increase the cost. The one that they're most resistant on is scope. They don't like to see a change in scope.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to go back to a question I asked the mayor earlier and get your thoughts to clarify for me. On the minimum operable segment.
Yes, sir.
That, to my mind, is still an ambiguous term. What does FTA understand when they say minimum operable in the MOS?
Okay, it's usually what will be the smallest that you can make a system and make it, I don't want to say operationally functional, but makes sense. I mean, originally, our LPA for the entire area goes out to EVA and goes up to UH Manoa, but they've squeezed it down to what they call an MOS, and they've determined that it's going to go from Kapolei over to Ala Moana right now. Usually, sir, that is written, and I apologize because I can't swear to it now, but usually it's written in the full funding grant agreement itself. And I'll have to check it when I go back.
I would really appreciate that. I would greatly appreciate something in writing that says the MOS is equal to the full funding grant. It seems to me there's two different terms there for a reason, and I'm a little incredulous that they're identical.
Actually, there are two different terms, but one is referring to an operable segment, and one is actually a legal document, a full funding grant agreement. But I'll straighten that out for you, sir.
Right. This comes back to the lens that I look through on this is not so much that we have a revenue problem, which is what we've pretty much heard all day today is the revenue problem. It's a spending problem. Right? So I'm looking at it from a little bit different perspective is how could we possibly shave off some real money here or there. And it seems to me that this discussion that we must have 21 stations, 20 miles, must go into the side of the Nordstrom's building at Ala Moana Center because that's where God wants it to go, is into this canyon where there can never be an extension. And you know what I mean by that.
That's been changed, by the way, but...
It has?
Yes, sir.
So where does it end now?
It's going to veer off and go up to Kapi'olani.
Oh, that sounds like a change. So, okay, I'm sorry, Chair. I'll wrap up. So if there is a viable plan and Honolulu and Hart comes back to the feds, and they say that maybe the legislature only approved an extra $1 billion or $2 or $3, and you need $5. At some point, if going to the feds and say, we can finish it for this if you will work with us. It seems to me that that would be something the feds would consider, at least consider if we went there with a modification or an option. Yes?
Is it a question?
Yes. My question is, would not FTA, they would consider at least an option if presented, with some logical reasoning.
Okay, can I caveat this and say this is an opinion?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I would think that they would, if push comes to shove, they would consider what we would call a deferral, not a deletion.
Okay. And last question,
okay.
Chair, please. Is there any reason why it has to be elevated the entire 20 miles? Or could it be modified to live within budget?
That's what your system is now.
Right. But the minimum operating segment is the length, right? Not necessarily the design.
Yeah, but I think that's what's called out in the full funding grant agreement. I'm pretty sure it's called for an elevated system.
So, but if you could go down and you could say we could finish this system with a much better budget, but we'd have to design change it, FTA might consider that.
I guess you could say people would consider anything, but changing a full funding grant agreement is a big deal. Okay. And eventually all the amendments have to go to Congress.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have several questions. Mr. Murphy, it was, Mr. Murphy, in the slide presentation you mentioned that there were several contracts that hasn't been awarded and you need to make that decision by August of 2018.
That's correct.
At new awards. Can you give us a figure as what the cost is for those new additional contracts?
That will be the city center guideway stations on the Pearl Island. It's about $1.65 billion.
And
approximately.
That's only one then? You did say several contracts.
Pardon me?
City center is 1.1.
Okay, city center, Sam corrected me. City center is $1.1 billion. On Pearl Island Transit Center is $350 million.
And you need to at least prior to the 2018 to sign those contracts? What happens after that then? The bids will change?
No, we don't have to sign the contract. We need to make sure we get the bids on it and the contract amount is signed and sealed.
Okay.
That's our, if we don't otherwise, then they will have to come back with revised bids.
Okay. Are there any other contracts, disputes, change orders, or other potential cost increases pending? And if so, can you provide information and the data that's including the estimated amount of these potential cost increases?
We have included all that in $8.165 billion, all the changes that we can think of and the pending claims that we consider that may be submitted by the contractors. We have included that in the 8.165. We'll be happy to provide you the details if you want.
Okay. Your budget reflects a tax-exempt commercial paper as a source of funds.
That's correct.
How will you repay this?
Robert?
Hi. The tax-exempt commercial paper is generally we pay when we go out annually to sell bonds. So part of the bond proceed will be used to pay off the commercial papers. So for example, our $350 million bond sale that is supposed to take place in September, part of the $350 million will be used to pay off the $80 million we have outstanding on commercial papers.
Okay. That was the question I was going to ask you. What are you going to use your other types of savings?
Right.
What are you going to use the monies for if you have another source of revenue?
Sure.
Okay. Before we continue with the questioning, can you make sure that the Senate President's Office and Speaker's Office has a copy, send the PowerPoint, and they will distribute to us as soon as you can?
Sure.
On the PowerPoint presentation, please. Okay, we'll open up to more questions. Anyone from the Senate? Then the Senator Kim.
Thank you. Mr. Carnaggio, can we get from you a list of the projects, rail projects across the country that had changes either to their route or their scope, and how much were they required to pay back to the FTA?
Yes, I'll.
Can you provide that to us? Okay.
I mean, I got to get it from FTA, but yes, I will get it.
But if you can get that and
Sure.
give it to the chair.
Of course I will.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. One more, Senator Thielen.
Also for Mr. Carnaggio,
Mr. Carnaggio.
a popular man today. You mentioned that the terminus has been changed from Ala Moana to Kapiolani. I think that's the first number of us had heard about that. Would you please explain that?
Actually, I say it changed, but that's in our plan. As you know, since the original alignment was set in, there's been a lot of construction done at Ala Moana at this particular point that sort of blocked where we would be going through if we had an extension. It would be stopped there. But what we've done is we've come up with another plan, and we've made a submittal to the FTA. If you don't mind, I'll have our planning director come up and give the specific details of what's going on there. Is that okay?
Sure, but if you could clarify just on the procedural first, so that has to be approved by the FTA?
Yes.
Is that going to trigger a new EIS and some other matters? And I guess the follow-up question is, if you're able to make these kinds of alternative plans, are you also going to be doing some alternative plans like taking the rail to at grade or other alternatives that would be less expensive that would allow us to get to the original destination point, which was the university?
Good afternoon, chairs, members. I'm Abby Mayer, Director of Planning, Permitting, and Right-of-Way for HART. Just to clarify, there's a couple different issues that tend to get confused, and the first is on the Ala Moana station location. There have, in the original EIS, the station was located furthest Diamond Head within Ala Moana on Kona Street. There was a change in location, I believe in 2012 or 13, I don't have the date with me, the station was pulled back on Kona Street 200 feet. The FTA, we submitted the change proposal to the FTA to see if it's consistent with all the other environmental impacts that are listed in the EIS, and that change was approved. Earlier this year, there was another proposal for a station location change, pulling the station back again, another 300 feet on Kona Street. The FTA is still reviewing that request, but what that station location would allow us to do in terms of extensions to UH would be to give us options to get toward Kapiolani. So the actual alignment hasn't been shifted to Kapiolani, but the station location on Kona Street has been altered slightly, or at least proposed to be, in order to allow for different options to get the extension. As for extension planning itself, that has not begun. We don't have funding for extension planning. We're focused on delivering the 21 stations and 20 miles per the FFGA. So hopefully that clarifies kind of where we're at and what we're doing.
So, Abby, I guess the question, though, about the getting to the University of Hawaii with the current funding is a number of entities have floated alternatives like taking the rail to grade level where it would be less expensive so that the current funding would allow you to reach the original destination, which is the university. So are those alternatives being reviewed by HART?
So I think what would have to happen is, so we have some engineering and design examples for both our current station location and the proposed station. I think what would have to happen, because the LPA includes a route from Ala Moana to UH Manoa, is that a full-on planning process evaluating different routes to get from Ala Moana to UH, whether it's at grade or elevated. Those things would have to be evaluated.
Sorry, Abby, you're not understanding my question. The at-grade proposal is at Middle Street, not just from Ala Moana going forward. It's to take the cost of the construction through the urban core down.
Right. So from my understanding, shifting from Middle Street to Ala Moana.
Just the question is, are you guys going to study it? Are you looking at, if you're already looking at other alternatives, are you going to be looking at alternative methods of constructing mass transit through the urban core that would lower the price?
Yeah, I think Murthy should talk about that rather than me at this point.
We have had several representations considering upgrade from Middle Street to Ala Moana to save costs. And we have addressed all the technical and non-technical issues associated with that concept. One of the biggest challenges is we are now a fully automated system. So if we have to change from aerial to upgrade, then we have to go into a manually operated system. That means making trains run at grade. Secondly, we have our current design of the maintenance facility and all the aerial stations are designed for fully automated system. The cars that we have ordered are high floor cars that comes in line with the platform edges. So if you want to use to upgrade level, then you have to order a new set of cars, completely new set of cars. And then we have to switch from third rail to an overhead catenary system. In addition to that, the operations at the upgrade level, if you choose the automatic, then you have to completely barricade them because you have to make sure that nobody encroaches on the third rail and get electrocuted. So that means if you can't do that, then what we have to do is cut down the system to a slower operation, 2-car trains running at maximum 6 minutes or 7 minutes interval, because we cannot block all the intersections. So we have to make sure the train timings are such that we provide enough intermission for the crossroad traffic to cross. So all of these complications makes it not suitable at this stage where we are. That's the reason why we are not recommending changing it to at grade.
Well, I guess you're talking about building a system where the bulk of the people, earlier was testified, are going to be switching to a bus system at Ala Moana to get to work in Waikiki. So I guess what I'm asking is if whether you're going to study, as opposed to just telling me why you're rejecting it, why you couldn't move that type of transportation center further back to be able to switch to an at-grade system that would take you farther for the existing funds, rather than coming here and asking for more money again, and possibly yet again in the future to do elevated all the way to Ala Moana, because that is incredibly expensive for an island where the population is only 1 million people.
It's a very good question. I will ask Mr. Wes Freisecke here. Wes, you want to respond to that? He is running all the bus operations. And
my name is Wes Freisecke. I'm the director of the Department of Transportation Services for the City and County of Honolulu, and as such, I'm also a member of the HART board. And that whole series of questions really is better asked of the city, because the city council is really the entity that makes those kinds of policy decisions. HART is dedicated really to fulfilling the obligations of the full funding grant agreement and the locally preferred alternative and the content of the full funding grant agreement, all those things we've already discussed. But when it comes to studying anything that is inconsistent with that directive, that would have to be a series of questions asked of the City and County of Honolulu. Well, the fact of the matter is that when it comes to studying alternatives, we're so focused right now on trying to get the project built that anytime we have studied alternatives before, we have found that the project in front of you is the best course of action. And there's a whole series of detailed technical reasons why. Murthy was answering some of those. But we do get into a case whereby, first of all, on Dillingham, on King, we are operating an excellent bus system now. The reason we're building this project is because that bus system doesn't have the capacity or the performance to move the people that are already moving. If we were to go to an at-grade solution, we would only be doing what we're already doing. A light rail solution in those corridors does not provide us with the capacity that we're trying to accomplish to provide the kinds of recommendations, the kinds of solutions that we need to move people. So we have investigated the trade-offs between technologies and alignments before, and we will continue to do so, but that's not the purpose. I don't think that's the purpose of this meeting.
Okay. Thank you. I have just a couple of more questions before we turn it over to the House. Bob, to my question with regards to the TECP, the tax-exempt commercial paper, if we're having savings, is there savings enough that can be applied, to shorten the term if we choose a date? Could those savings be used at least to apply?
You mean the savings to apply
exactly.
to the commercial
Because you're
paper?
using the savings right now for other sources, right? Other payments. You just mentioned, I asked you what, with the savings you have, what are you using the savings to pay?
No, we're using the bond sales to pay for the to pay down the commercial paper.
Yes, but you do have savings, your tax-exempt commercial paper. You need to repay, but you also are having, if there are savings, you're using the savings to pay other sources.
Oh, you mean if there are savings
yes.
in the project? For example, if the project, instead of being 6.1,
right.
65, it's 8 billion, for example. Yeah, if we have that type of savings, then we would reduce our expenditure projection, and we probably could borrow a little bit less because we have that $165 million in savings.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that the question?
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, anyone here from the board? My question would be, why is our new executive director to be here in May?
That the board member...
Or September, did you say?
Yes, the mayor, he's always so accurate, but on this one occasion he misspoke. He meant September, I think the 4th is Labor Day. I think the contract actually starts September 5th for the new chief executive officer.
This year?
Excuse me?
This year?
This year, yes,
okay.
this year.
All right, just want
in a matter
to
of
make
3 weeks.
Clear. Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. House members?
House members, any questions? Let's start with Rep. Nakamura.
I have a question for your CFO.
Hi.
So since the House position was taken at the beginning of May, did you run any scenarios on how that would play out with the 1% additional TAT?
So, okay, you're asking specifically about the 1% TAT because there were many positions.
Well, the House's position.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Did you
with
run
the
scenarios on how that would play out and how you might finance the project given additional funds up front?
Oh yeah, sure. I think if I remember correctly, with GET extension, I think of 4 years, with at 99.1 and a TAT 1% beginning, I think it was January of next year. Obviously, the financing cost will be substantially lower than a 10-year GET only.
How much was that savings?
The 10-year GET only, if I recall correctly, is about $1.6 billion. And I think with the 4-year GET and TAT 1%, I could give you the exact number because we have it. Is Mike. Our fiscal officer is here. We brought all these models.
That would be great. Would it be possible to get copies of your projections based on the Senate and then on the House's version?
Okay.
Of what passed and what the
if I may, can I ask a question? Which version do you prefer? I mean, we probably have over 100 versions with different combinations of TAT, GET, and other sources of revenue that we haven't really, or we haven't really gotten into.
So with the House's version, with the upfront sources of revenues, how would you, is it beneficial to the project?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anytime a project gets more money up front, that means you will have much lower finance charges, depending on how much upfront money we're talking about. I think in one of the models, the lowest finance charge with a huge amount of upfront money is close to, it's just below $500 million. So if you're looking at, comparing finance expenses, for fronting a huge sums of money up front compared to extending the debt through, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, yeah, the finance charges obviously will be much lower.
And would you do your financing differently from what you are currently doing?
Yeah, of course. We would do our financing based on what the projected revenues are for any given year. So if, for example, if all the money comes in 2018, then obviously we would look at that and we may not have to finance the project, right? If the difference between what was short comes in all at one time. But whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But we would look at the additional amount of money coming in annually, and we would build our financing plan based on that. Mike, you
And have those 100 scenarios been shared with the legislature?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next, we have Rep. Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to push the envelope a bit that Senator Wakai tried to open about creativity and about private sector. 50% of the corridor, of the TOD corridor, is state-owned land. What prevents you from doing at least a little bit of what Japan and Hong Kong does by getting private sector money in exchange for development rights for either shopping areas, hotels, workforce housing, or what have you, that are very, very valuable? And I should have asked the City Council while they were here. What prevents us from getting any development right, private sector money? Why haven't we done that? Why haven't we looked at it?
It's a policy question. I don't know whether I can answer that, to be honest with you.
So policy means with us or with the City Council? Is that
Policy of the city to come up with how, our task is decided by the City Council, and they said, okay, your job is to build this 20 miles of the elevated guideway, and that's all the agreement that we have from the city. Unless they change that to do other things, then we can look at other options. But we do advise them on some of the things as to what they can do.
So earlier when people said, well, what backup contingency plans, or what are you going to do if we don't give you the full funding? Nobody said, well, we're going to go to the private sector or we're going to do development rights. Because they do 80–90% of their money comes from the private sector. I'm just amazed, aghast, and I know I've been sounding like a broken record on this, that without the private sector funding, another dollar from the public taxpayer is totally undeserved. Having said that, I want to thank you and your troops for coming out to Hawaii Kai for not only the neighborhood board, but Mr. Yu came out and did a beer summit. A lot of good questions, a lot of good answers. It was very civil. Except one thing came up, which I want to ask you, Mr. Murthy. The buck stops with you. You got 21 miles of rail, but my understanding is you only have 4 parking stations. You got 4 parking structures. How are you going to get people to do the rail unless you expect them to walk, or the bus system is going to be rejiggered to get everybody to stop at the rail? How can you get away with only 4 parking structures? The rule of thumb is they're either a quarter a mile in terms of bus stops, or at least 2 miles in terms of BART and other ones when you have stations. Here you got 20 miles and 4, you got 5 miles between your stations if they are equally distributed.
You're absolutely correct. Right now we have a committee of City and County of Honolulu and Hart to look at this integration of the bus and rail, and some of these issues will definitely be looked into and addressed. How can we do this? How can bus becomes a good feeder to the rail, and which buses should be kept as expressway lines? So those are the issues on the table that are being looked at by this committee of the two.
Yeah, there's still a big romance between the people on Oahu and their cars. It's going to take a bit of a persuasion. Last question. I don't see Randy or Ben Cayetano or Sam Sloan or Cliff Slater here, but I have a question that I think in their dialogue they had raised. Is it technically, theoretically, and economically and physically possible to run driverless buses on your elevated highway rather than these rail steel-on-steel trains? Could you literally run driverless buses back and forth as efficiently as you are with the train?
You want to run buses on the elevated guideway?
Yes.
It takes retrofitting, a lot of work that we have done in order to use that. So it will be a different clearance requirements, especially with the stations and all that. All of those may need to be looked at.